For you to take an
Modularity.
air vehicle
Angular
from
follows
where you are in the
modularity.
city and back.
Similar
with, like,
functionalities
you know,
are kept
driving a
together
car
in
and
same
doing
module.
parking and
This gives
all those
Angular
other
a
things.
lighter and a
So you
faster core.
have a much more collection
With
of
TypeScript,
choices
Angular
and the
has
ability to
instilled
pick
class-based
which is right for what you want to do. You know, flying helicopters for 20 years, I do have a little bit different perspective than a lot of my colleagues. And being able to see the landscape from the air and knowing what some of the challenges are has helped, you know, contribute to the conversation of what we think urban air mobility will look like. It'll be interesting because I think the weather we'll see in the future will be much more refined, and you will have reporting on microclimates, so you won't just get the weather for your entire metropolitan area. You can
Creating a
probably get the
website
weather
in
for,
itself
you
gives
know,
a
your
great
local 3
feeling,
blocks
and
the
it just
next 3
gets better
blocks
when you're doing it using
and have
Angular.
much better predictive
Hey everyone,
systems
welcome back
to
to
be
a
able
whole
to
new
plan your
exciting
trip and to
session from
choose which mode of
Edureka.
transportation
My name
is
is
best for
Bajiha,
you.
and in this Angular tutorial, you will learn
So
all
we're
that you
here
need to know
now
about
at the
Angular
dawn
8,
of a
and
new
also
age of
everyone, welcome
ready
back
to
to a
take
new
the next
exciting
step.
session from Edureka.
It may
So
seem
discussion
like
is
it's
Bajiha, and in this Angular tutorial, you will
So
learn all
we're
that you
here
need to know
now
about
at this
Angular
time
8,
of a
and
new
also
age
everyone, welcome back
ready
to
to
a
take
new
the next
exciting
step.
session from
It may
Edureka. So
seem like
discussion
it's
is Bajiha, and in this Angular tutorial, you will
So
learn all
we're
that
here
you need to know
now
about
at this
Angular
time
8,
of a
and
new
also
age
everyone, welcome back to
ready
a
to
new
take the
exciting
next
session
step.
from
It
Edureka.
may
So
seem like
discussion
it's
is Bajiha, and in this Angular tutorial,
So we're here now at this time of a new age ready to take the next step. It may seem like it's So we're here now at this time of a new age
Another power-packed spacewalk outside the space station, highlighting a pretty cool comet. And a key piece of the spacewalk system hardware is on the move. A few of the stories to tell you about this week's matter. Our Chris Cassidy and Bob Bacon were back outside the International Space Station on July 16th to outfit one of the station's power channels with new lithium-ion batteries and associated hardware. The spacewalk is one of the few remaining in a 3.5-year effort to upgrade the station's power system. NASA photographer Bill Ingalls recently captured images of Comet Neowise in the early morning skies over Washington, D.C. The comet, which was discovered by and nicknamed after our Neowise spacecraft, has been visible at certain hours with the naked eye and has been spotted by several NASA spacecraft, as well as astronauts aboard the space station.
The fact that we can see it is really what makes it unique. It's quite rare for a comet to be bright enough that we can see it with the naked eye or even with just binoculars. The last time we had a comet that was this bright was Comet Hale-Bopp back in 1995 and 1996.
Comet Neowise is expected to make its closest approach to Earth on July 22nd. On July 17th, teams at our Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, put the wheels in motion to transport the launch vehicle stage adapter for our Space Launch System rocket to our Kennedy Space Center in Florida in preparation for the first uncrewed Artemis mission around the moon and back. The adapter, which connects the upper and core stages of the rocket, is being transported aboard the agency's Pegasus barge. On July 16th, the joint European Space Agency NASA Solar Orbiter mission released the mission's first data, captured during the spacecraft's first close pass of the Sun. On that flyby last month, Solar Orbiter captured the closest images ever taken of the Sun and had all 10 of its instruments turned on together for the first time, including an American-led instrument designed to pinpoint coronal mass ejection. We are now targeting October 31st, 2021 for the launch of our James Webb Space Telescope from French Guiana due to impacts from the ongoing coronavirus pandemic as well as technical challenges. Engineers recently conducted the first full systems evaluation on Webb since the telescope was assembled into its final form. It's a critical software and electrical analysis on the entire observatory as a single fully connected vehicle. Webb is the largest and most technically complex space science telescope NASA has ever built. The Calypso satellite, a joint venture between NASA and the French space agency CNES, helped provide a unique view of the massive Saharan dust plume that crossed the North Atlantic Ocean in June into parts of the U.S. The animation includes data and images of Calypso, a space-based laser that measures clouds and small atmospheric particles, and from National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration satellites. That's what's up this week at NASA. For more on these and other stories, follow us on the web at nasa.gov/talk.
So before we begin, just make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to stay updated with all the latest Edureka
How do you
videos.
make sense of something
Also,
you
if
can't
you're
see?
interested in getting
This
online
is the
training
electromagnetic spectrum, where light travels in waves. Without it, the world you know could not exist. The human eye can only see a very small part of the spectrum called visible light, but a whole new universe is revealed by looking through infrared. Infrared light we cannot see, but it can be felt in the form of spectrum. Every object, whether hot or cold, gives off heat. Special thermal cameras use colors to show us if something is warm or cold. Some objects are hot enough to show visible light, and things that are too cold to be seen by the naked eye can let off infrared, such as your body or this cup of coffee. IR light is very practical ways. Longer IR waves can see your dinner. Shorter IR waves that are used in your TV's remote control, and firemen use IR cameras to see through smoke to find long cracks in a fire. So how does this apply to shorter IR? On top of showing us colder objects, infrared wavelengths let us see through large amounts of gas and dust, lifting the veil to what lies on the other side. Spitzer sees objects like exoplanets or the Milky Way by looking at their infrared glow from the heat they give off. This gives us the ability to see what is beyond, and that's IR.
Dynamic interaction with the user. It rewrites the current page rather than reloading the page entirely. This leads to an uninterrupted
Hi,
user experience.
my name is Chelsea Walker. I'm a materials and process designer with Northrop Grumman, the lead contractor for the solid rocket boosters
or
of
just
NASA
the
Space
appropriate
Launch
resources
System. This is
uploaded
rocket
and then
science.
added to the page if required. Neither is the page reloaded completely.
These boosters
nor do
produce
they control
7.2
transfer
million
to any
pounds
other
of thrust
page.
during liftoff and flight.
There are many
I work on the
frameworks that allow
installation
you
to
to
protect
create
the
interface
SLS solid
applications.
rocket booster during
Some of them
flight.
are Angular, React, Vue, Knockout, and Graphics.
Here,
However,
in the
most
installation
widely
and
used
component work
framework
center,
is
the
Angular.
insulation, a rubber-based material, is applied to the inside of the rocket motor
AngularJS.
case to protect it from the
Before you
burning
want to see
propellant.
what exactly is Angular, let's take a look at AngularJS.
Combine raw materials together through a two-roll mill to the metal sheet. We then apply the installation to the metal rocket motor case. After the installation is secured, a liner is applied. This is an adhesive that helps the propellant stick to the insulation. Then the case is ready to go to our casting facility where it is loaded with propellant.
Offered by other JavaScript frameworks in the market. AngularJS has a large bundle size, has performance issues, and it did not support mobile devices. Therefore, to resolve these issues, Angular was created. Since then, Angular has taken over AngularJS, but the Angular community has said that they have extended the support for AngularJS applications until the 30th of June 2021. The rise of Angular. Angular is an open source web application that is maintained by Google. It is based on TypeScript language, which is also an open source programming language developed by Microsoft. TypeScript is basically the 2% of JavaScript. TypeScript, Angular introduced an object-oriented programming paradigm into web development. We shall take a deep look at TypeScript
famous Italian monk Giordano Bruno in 1586 published a book in which he said the sun is a star and that the earth was a planet, and that other stars certainly had planetary systems and probably even had life. And for that and other radical things that he said, the church burned him publicly. You could say that extrasolar planets was a much hotter field back then. And for that and other radical things that he said, the church burned him publicly. You could say that extrasolar planets was a much hotter field back then.
on other planets.
And for that and other radical things that he said, the church burned him publicly. You could say that extrasolar planets was a much hotter field back then. And for that and other radical things that he said, the church burned him one person would be in there doing the setup, and the other person would be outside of the room looking through a porthole with two gas masks. And his job was, if something went wrong, throw on a gas mask, run into the room, throw the gas mask on the other guy, and drag him the hell out. Any good science should have one person would be in there doing the setup, and the other person would be outside of the room looking through a porthole with two gas masks. And his job was really pioneer, and the other person would be outside the room looking through a porthole with two gas masks.
Because of the way
And his job was
in the interest of astronomers looking for exoplanets. But these new exoplanets were not orbiting a regular star. They were orbiting a pulsar.
Two very small bodies got detected at Arecibo by Wolfram and his colleagues. They really got us scratching our heads. So we call them pulsar planets.
And Wolfram and Frail is somewhat of a special case because I don't think anyone really doubted that these were planets as much at the time, but they were planets around a bizarre object, a pulsar.
But they really were the first two bodies to orbit a dead star, not a currently shining star.
The formation of planets is an incredibly robust process, and that's what that discovery told us, and we missed it because we didn't understand.
We should have understood that planets don't come in ones, that they come in systems, but we were still focused on finding the very first planet.
Dependency updates. Angular 8 has updated the dependencies on tools like RxJS,
Halfway
Node,
around
and
the world in Geneva, a pair of Swiss astronomers were hard at work developing a different technique. Their instrument relied on fiber optic technology, and they used it to turn their eyes on exoplanets.
My first day of work, I got this booklet from Michel that was the ultimate knowledge of data processing and spectroscopy. That was almost nothing at that time, and that's it. And we had to do this instrument, and we designed this practically without much support from anybody else because the other people thought that this was not interesting.
After
from its libraries that you import
few
in your
months,
application.
already at the
most
end
basic
of
building
line
blocks of
4,
Angular are nothing
we
but NG
got
modules.
a signal
NG modules
of
basically provide a
variability
compilation
for several
context
stars,
for
not
components
only
present
one,
in your
several
project.
stars.
We
NG
realized very
modules will
rapidly
collect all
that the
the
instrument could be far
related code
more
into
precise
functional
than we
sets.
thought. So I started
Therefore,
with a
it can
couple
be
of stars a
claimed
bit
that
more
an
intensively,
Angular
and
app
51
is
peg was
defined
one
by
of
a
them
set
because
of
it was
NG
bright.
modules.
And
Every
very
Angular
rapidly,
application
51
will have
peg
at
had a
least one
very
module,
weird
which is the
behavior.
root
On
module.
one side, we were
This
absolutely
module
sure
enables the
of
bootstrapping
the
process, which
quality
I'll
of our
discuss later
measurement.
on, and typically
All
has many
the
more feature
signal was in
modules.
favor of a
The Angular
planet,
components actually define
but
views.
it's evident
Views
it was
are
a
nothing
so
but sets
unusual
of screen
planet.
elements that
I
Angular
really
can
thought at
select
that
among
time,
and modify
there is something
according to your
really bad
application's
in the
logic
software
and
on
the
the
information that is
instruments,
given.
and I better to figure
Components
out
in turn
because
make use of
otherwise my
services.
PhD would be compromised.
These services provide application-specific functionality
Over the next
that
several
is
months,
related
the two
directly to
astronomers
views.
checked and
Service
rechecked
providers
their
can be
data.
injected
The
into
problem
components
was
as
no one
dependencies,
could
making your
imagine a
code
giant
modular,
planet with such a
reusable, and
short
efficient.
orbit.
Components and
So we
services
came back
are
in
nothing
July.
but classes
This time
having
together
decorators
with
that are
Michel,
used to
very
mark their
excited.
type
Say,
and
okay,
provide
let's
metadata
see
informing
whether
Angular how to use them.
the conclusion that we
metadata for a
had with the
component class
first bunch of
associates
data
it
we
with the
had
templates that define
still
a view.
holds.
Templates
The
combine
real
ordinary
moment
HTML
where
with
we
Angular
had the
directives and binding
confirmation
markup
of
that
the
allows
reality
Angular to modify the
of
HTML
51
before rendering
peg
it to
was
display.
really a
The
planet
metadata for a
was in
service
July
class tells Angular
25.
to make it available for other
First
components
data
through
on
dependency
it, we
injection.
say, okay, just
Components
lock.
define many views arranged in a
Second
hierarchical
data
order.
still on the curve.
The
We
router
say,
service
okay,
can
well,
be used
2
to
is fine,
define
but still
navigation
2 is not
paths
enough.
among various views
The
of
third
your
one, we're still on
application,
it,
as
following
routers
a
provide
track. I mean,
sophisticated
and then we say,
in-browser
well,
navigational capabilities.
let's just wait the fourth
Moving on in
to
this
be
session,
really, really
let me show
sure.
you guys how to
Because it
install
was so,
Visual Studio Code.
so embarrassing
The
conclusion
reason
of the
why I'm
planet
using
that we
Visual
really
Studio
want to
Code
make
is
sure
because
that
it's
that was real.
lightweight, fast,
We
and
got
open source cross-platform
the
application,
good period,
and it also
the
has
good
other cool
amplitude, and
features.
so on.
To
So
install
at the
Visual
time
Studio
was
Code,
really
you can
the
go to the
time for the
official website
celebration.
and download the version
Before
that's
we were
suitable
not
for your
sure that it
operating
was a
system.
I
planet.
mean, there is a real
Just go to the
planet.
browser.
Believe it or not,
Over here,
it does.
I'll just type
There is no
in
theory to predict that planet, but there is a
Code.
planet there.
Download.
Following days of rumors circling the globe, at a conference
So as you
in
can
Florence,
see, this is the
Italy, the
official Visual
news
Studio Code
unofficially
downloading website.
leaked. A
From here, you can
Jupiter-sized
choose any
planet
of
had
the
been
versions that is
discovered.
suitable for your
This
operating
massive
system
planet
and
was
download the
making a
installer.
complete orbit
Once you're done
of
with
its
installing it
star
on your
in
systems,
only
all
4
you have to do is
days.
just complete
How
the
could
setup
that
and it
be?
will be ready to use.
Suddenly, there's
Since
this
it's
51
already
peg,
installed
which is
on
a
my system,
Jupiter-sized
I'm not going
planet,
to
but in a
download the
4-day
installer
orbit.
again.
And people knew that
So
was
once
impossible.
you're done installing Visual
Jupiter-like
Studio Code,
planets
you'll have to
orbit at
install
like Jupiter
Angular.
and Saturn orbital
The
distances.
first step is to install Node.js.
Back in San Francisco,
The reason
Marcy
for
and
installing
Butler, by
Node.js is
mere
that
coincidence,
all web
had
browsers, such
4
as Chrome,
consecutive
Firefox,
days of
etc.,
reserved
understand
telescope
only
time at the Lick
JavaScript.
Observatory.
Now, all the
The
code that we
exact
write
amount
in
of time
TypeScript must
needed
be
to
transpiled
confirm
to
or
JavaScript.
debunk the claim.
The TypeScript transpiler requires Node.js for generating the TypeScript
We hit the
code to
star very
JavaScript.
hard for those
So to
4
install
nights.
Node.js, you
We
can go
reduced
to
the
the
data as
official
quickly as
website.
we can. We were blown away. We saw exactly the signal that Mayor and Clo had announced.
Confirming my data
And from here, choose the
to
version
me
that is
was
suitable
just,
for your
just
operating
the best
system
gift I could have
and
had
download
because
the
I said,
same.
oh, fine. So
Once the
all
installer
the
has
work
been
I did
downloaded,
is
install
right.
Node.js on your systems. After you're done with the installation, all you have to do is open up the command prompt.
Here in San Francisco, the discovery was dramatically verified just
And
this
over here,
past weekend.
just type in the command Node
October 19th,
-v.
1995.
What may be the discovery of new planets outside our solar system
So as you can see
has
over here,
created
the version of
enormous
Node that I'm
excitement
using currently
among
is
astronomers.
12.14.1.
The confirmation was made
So the
before the
moment Node is
official
installed
announcement
on
of
your
the discovery
systems, you'll be able
itself.
to see the version
It
of
went
it.
completely out
So
of
I hope you
control.
guys are clear till
Everybody
here.
was
The
discussing
next step is
of this
installing the
new
Angular
object,
CLI or
except
command line
us.
interface.
By tradition, scientists have
I'll
their
be making use
discoveries
of
peer-reviewed
NPM as
by
a
other
package manager which
scientists
comes along
for
with Node.js by
accuracy.
default.
That was one of the
referees on the paper. If they
were three
CLI,
referees.
all I have to do is type in npm.
Normally, I think they only do two,
install
but this was so big that the nature editor, Leslie Sage, was being very careful.
Because of the situations, nature was very strict. They say, well, look, guys, if you talk to people, then we're not going to
G over
publish your
here
paper.
specifies that I
So
want to install
it's
the
only
Angular
after
CLI
1
globally.
month or something
This is
like
going to
this
take a while.
that I receive a message
The Angular
from
CLI
nature
is
that,
actually
okay,
a command line
no,
interface tool that is
you
used to
are relaxed from
initialize,
the
develop,
embargo.
and maintain
Because
Angular
the discovery was
applications.
just too big.
We can
just
make use
far
of this
too
tool
big
directly in the command
to
shell
follow
or
the
indirectly
usual,
through an interactive UI or use
scheme
such as
that is
Angular
required for
console.
scientific paper. As soon as you start talking about that, I mean, everybody wanted to
I
know
just have a
about
new
this.
patch version available over here, so I'm going to run the
no question
npm
about that.
install -g npm command. So now I have the latest version of npm.
As soon as we detected 51 peg, he had on his data plenty of something like that.
The next step
You
over
just need
here
to
is
look
to
at it.
create
At this
a
point, we
new
hadn't analyzed
Angular
all our data.
project.
We had two
Now to
computers,
do that, I have to
and it would
make
have
use of
literally
the
taken us
ng
5
new
or 6
command.
years to get
The
through all
ng
the
new
data.
command will be followed
So
by the name of the project.
literally about a half
So I'll
a
just
dozen
take a
different
sample
groups
project
said,
over
you know,
here.
we
I'll
just
say
received
ng
these new computers,
and I'll just call it
and
sample.
we're not going to use them for the next several
And
months.
I'll
You
just
want to
call
dump
it
your
as sample
jobs on it.
project.
Within 2 months, 2 other Jupiters circling around their
Now when
stars
you
were
do this,
found
you
by
will
Marcy
encounter
and
two
Butler,
questions.
and
That
the
is, if you would
floodgates
like
of
to add
planet
Angular
hunting
routing,
were now
and what type of
wide
style
open.
sheet do you prefer? So for the first question, I'll just choose yes
You know, from
and press
no
Y.
planets at all to the point where we're discovering a new
second, I'm
planet
going to
every
choose
month or even
CSS.
sometimes every week.
So I'll hit
And
enter.
almost all of the planetary systems that we found were very different from the solar system, weren't even similar
However,
in
if
the
you are
least bit.
comfortable with any
I
other
remember
style sheet, you
asking
can
at
go
a
ahead and
meeting,
select
you know,
that one.
how long do you think this will
Now,
go
this is going
on?
to take a
And I
while
think
to
Michelle
create a
Mayor
project.
said, oh, maybe, you know, another 5 or 10 years, and then the game is over. Fortunately, the game just got a lot more exciting.
The ng-new command creates an initial skeleton of Angular application by default at the root level of the workspace. Not just that, it also creates end-to-end tests.
After getting my
When you open this
PhD, I became
application
aware
on
of
the
this
local host,
fellow
you will
at
see that a
NASA
simple
Ames
welcome
Research
page
Center,
will
Bill
appear,
Barucki.
which you
I
can
would see him
modify
at all
later
these
on to
meetings. They
create
were
your
very
own
small meetings
application.
back in the day. And like he'd literally be by himself out having dinner, so we would join him and
So
chat
now
about
our
things,
project
and
is
he was
created.
very persistent.
Now what I'm
Bill
going to do is
walked
just
around
get
the
into my
halls, and
project.
whenever the Ames managers saw
name
him
of my
coming,
project
they
was
turned and
Sample
walked
Project.
the other way.
Bill Barucki wrote a paper in the
And I
1980s
did.
that described the transit
I want to
method.
open this project in Visual Studio
When that planet
Code.
passes
So
in
I'll
front
just
of the
type in
star,
code,
the starlight drops by a
space,
tiny, tiny
dot.
amount. And by measuring the brightness of the star, minute by minute, we can detect planets going in front of the star, and we call that the transit method.
So now
And
my project
detectors
is
that can
open
measure
in
that
Visual
precise
Studio
drop in
Code.
brightness didn't exist
As you
yet.
can see over here, my project already contains a number of files that are created by Angular.
anyone ever built
The
one.
first is the end-to-end
But I'd
folder.
worked on the Apollo
The
program,
end-to-end
I'd worked on
folder
other programs.
contains a source
So
of
it's not
files
really
to
that
perform
scary.
set
You
of
just need to
end-to-end tests that correspond
get
to the
down to brass
root-level
tacks and
application
find
along
out what's
with
required and
test-specific
build it.
configuration files. Next up is the Node Modules folder. This provides a
There
set
just
of
is
NPM
no way
packages for the entire
finding
workplace.
small planets
The source
in
folder.
orbits like that as
Source
Earth,
folder contains
unless
all the
you go
root
into
level
space. You must go
application
into
source
space.
files that are
He
required
kept
for your
getting shot
application
down by the review
development.
panels for
The edit
various
config
reasons,
folder.
and each time he'd fix the
edit
reason and go
config
back to the
folder
second time.
specifies the
And they basically said
configuration
it's
for
not
the
going to
code
work.
editors.
Well,
Git
Bill Barucki
ignore.
didn't bother
Git
reading that
ignore
report, or at
specifies
least did
the
not take it to
intentionally
heart. Kept on
unflagged
his
files
crusade
that
to
should
show
be
that
ignored
transit
by Git.
detection should work.
The
He was able to
Angular.json
demonstrate in the
folder.
lab that he could measure
All
the
the CLI
precision
configuration
required to find
defaults for
Earth-sized
all
planets
projects
orbiting
in the
sun-like stars.
workspace, including
Some people call it
configuration options
stubbornness,
for build,
but the point is I
serve,
knew
and
it
test
would
tools
work.
that the
So he
CLI
proposed
uses,
and
such as
reproposed, and eventually
TSLint,
he conceived
Karma,
of a
and
Discovery
Protractor.
class mission that was
Next
later
up is the
called
browser
Kepler.
configuration options for build, serve, and test tools that the CLI uses,
and
such as
proposed, and eventually he
TSLint,
conceived
Karma,
of a
and
Discovery
Protractor.
class mission that was
Next
later
up is
called
the browser
Kepler.
configuration options for build, serve, and test tools that the CLI uses, such as TSLint, Karma, and
Discovery class
Protractor.
mission that was later called Kepler. Discovery class mission that was later called
Each one has one or maybe more.
The first folder that you see over here is the app folder. This folder contains all the component files in which your application logic and data are defined.
To succeed in
Next up is the
exoplanets,
assets
we have
folder.
to be very ambitious
Assets contain
and very
image
bold.
and other asset files that are
Kepler's
to be copied
impact
when
was
you build your application.
Extreme, certainly more than I'd
Environments.
ever imagined.
It contains
It's
build
basically opened up
configuration
an
options
entire
for
new
particular target
era
environments.
of
By
astronomy.
default, there is an unnamed standard development environment and a production environment. You can define additional target environment configurations if required. favicon.ico. It is nothing but an icon to use for this application in the bookmark bar.
Now that we know
index.html
that the galaxy
file.
is teeming with planets,
The main
we
HTML
are
page
ready
that is
to go to
served
the
when
next
someone
chapter
visits your
of
site.
planetary exploration.
The CLI
I
automatically
truly
adds
believe
all
that the
JavaScript and
2020s are
CSS
shaping up to
files
be a golden
when
age
building
for
your
observational
application.
astrophysics.
So you
We have these
typically
amazing
don't need to
telescopes
add
like
any
TESS, the
script
Transiting
or link
Exoplanet
tags.
Survey Satellite.
Next
We
up
have
is the
WFIRST, which is
main.ts
this
file.
Hubble-sized
The
telescope
main.ts
that
file
can see
is the entry
100
point
times
for
as
your
much of the sky
application.
in each image.
It compiles
We
the
have the James
application
Webb
with
Space
JIT
Telescope, which is
compiler or the
the
just-in-time
largest and
compiler
most powerful
and bootstraps
telescope
the
we've ever
application
built.
root module.
The reason that we
The
can even
application's root module
dream
is
about
nothing
that
but
and
the app
create
module,
something like that
which
is
I'll be
because
showing you
of the
guys
success
shortly.
of Spitzer and
And you can
Hubble
also
and the
make use of
previous
the AOT
great
compiler
observatories.
without changing
I'm looking forward
any
to
code by
space-based missions where they're going to have
appending the
coronagraph
-AOT
technology
flag.
and maybe even
Now this
starfield technology
-AOT flag
in order to
should be
image
attached to the
exoplanets
build
by
and the
blocking
serve
out the
commands
light
in
from
the CLI.
stars.
Polyfills.ts.
And we
This
have
file
the
provides
next
scripts for the
generation
browser support.
large 30-meter class telescopes on the ground, which are
all
going to
the
be
CSS
coming
files
online
that
in the
supply styles
2020s.
for this project.
But the question that has me
Tests.ts
most
file.
excited about
This
the future of
is nothing but the
astronomy
entry point for
is
all
to
your
answer
unit
the
tests
question,
with some
are we
Angular
alone in
specific
the universe?
configuration. Typically, you don't need to edit any of the code that is present within these test
Finding
files.
evidence of life
So now, let me
on
open
an
the folder that we
exoplanet,
are going to be
finding an indication
modifying
of a
in order
living
to
world
create our
is
application.
within our reach.
That is nothing but the app folder.
What is life?
The app folder also
Life
consists of a
It's
number
a
of files within
process to
itself.
transfer
The
information
app.component.ts
from one
file
generation
defines
to
the
another.
logic for the
Everybody
application's
is
root
interested in
component or the
the
app
search for
component.
planets, the search
The
for
view that is
places that remind us
associated
of
with this
home.
component becomes the
We're
root
looking
of
for
the view
some
hierarchy.
hint of our origins, where we came from. And
app.component.html
exoplanets may very well
It
provide that
defines
context.
HTML template associated with
There
the
may
root
be
app
more
component.
habitable real estate
App.component.css file.
out there
This
beyond
defines
our
the
solar
base
system
CSS
than
style
we
sheet
once
for
thought.
root app component.
I think we're naturally
app.module.ts
curious to
file.
find out if
This
there
is
are
a very
other
important
conditions
file
in the
and
universe
defines
that
the
might be
root
similar
module
to
named
our
the
own.
app module.
And finding
The app module
exoplanets
tells
around
Angular
other
how to
stars
assemble
is the
this
first
application.
important clue.
It initially declares only the app
The search for
component.
planets is a
However,
search for life.
as you proceed, when
And
you add
even
on more
though we didn't
components,
really
you
say
have
that
to
out
specify
loud,
them
that
over
was
here.
always in the back of our minds.
So as you can see over here, it consists of the app component. Now when I create more components for this project, all I have to do is come and import it over here. So now that you're aware of all these files, let's move on and create a simple project in Angular. Any website generally consists of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML basically deals with the content definition, whereas CSS provides the layout. JavaScript actually helps you make dynamic and responsive web applications. So in case you do not have an idea about these, go ahead and check out Edureka's tutorials on the same. So now let's move on and write a simple Hello World program in Angular. So I've created a sample project. Now what I'm going to do is run this project. To run this project, I'll get back to the command prompt. And over here, I'll just type in ngserve. Port 4200 seems to be in use. So in case you guys encounter the same problem, all you have to do is type in netstat
Over
followed by
-40,000
-a,
airports are scattered across our planet,
-o,
housing more than
and
23,000 airplanes.
Now this is going to return
Every
all the
day,
processes that are running on my PC.
Air traffic controllers keep pilots and passengers safe from not only
So what I'm going to
collisions,
do is just
but
find
also
port
wake encounters,
4200,
which can be just as
so I'll just type in
dangerous.
4200 and I'll find it.
A wake is created whenever a vehicle passes through
So
a
as you can
medium.
see over here,
A common
the process
example are
ID
the
that
waves
is making
created
use
by a
of
boat
this port
moving
is
across a body of
3680.
water.
Now what I'm going to do is
Aircraft
kill this
wakes
process.
are a bit different.
To kill this
When a
process,
vehicle is
all I have to
flying,
do is
it
come
generates high pressure underneath and low pressure on top.
So I'll just remember
the,
that
the high
process
pressure
ID,
wants to
it's
go to the low pressure,
3680.
and so behind an aircraft, you have these counter-rotating vortices. There is this
And over here, I'll
invisible
type in
wake
task,
with this upwash portion on the outboard
part of that counter-rotating and then a downward on the inside. Think of them as horizontal tornadoes.
Quake vortices are invisible and can continue for several minutes before dissipating. So air traffic controllers must keep several miles distance between airplanes. This can result in inefficient flight paths and delays, especially if portions of airspace are shut down due to things like volcanic ash plumes or severe thunderstorms.
The same problem. So as you can see, my project has compiled successfully.
Engineers at
Now what
NASA's
I'm going to do
Armstrong
is go
Flight
to my
Research
browser,
Center are testing
and
new
over here,
technologies
I'll
and
just type in
methods to help
localhost
aircraft identify where wakes are and avoid them,
4200.
or even ride them.
So as you can see, our sample project app is running. This
NASA's
is a welcome
been
page that is
interested
created
in
by
improving the
Angular.
efficiency
Now
of
to build
flight
your project,
from
all
its
you have to
initial
do is go
inception.
and modify
Some
this.
conventional and
So I'll
some
just get back to my
unconventional.
project.
And this is really
So
one
what
of
I'm
the
going to do
unconventional
is
ways.
just open this app component.html file.
It's really
I'll
biologically
delete
inspired.
everything present over here
If you've
except
ever
the
seen a
router
flock
outlet.
of geese, the reason they fly in a V is that the trailing birds are really gaining efficiency from the lead bird by flying in
And over here,
the
I'll
upwash
just give a H1
caused
tag.
by vortices generated by
And
the
I'll just
wing
type in
flight.
hello world.
Some of the early formation flights were military
I'll
in the
save
early
this.
1900s.
I'll get
In
back to my project,
2000 and
I'll read out
2001,
this page.
Armstrong flew
So as you can
F-18s
see over
in
here, instead
formation,
of seeing that
but
welcome
really
screen,
close,
all
like
I'm seeing over
within
here is hello
150
world, which I
feet or
modified
so
in
of
my
one another,
project.
and showed
So that was
efficiency
just
that
very
way.
basic.
We've also done it in
We'll get into
partnership
more
with the
details
Air
of that
Force
later on,
on
but for
large
now,
transports,
let me tell
the
you guys how this
C-17.
Angular
In this
application
experiment,
actually
it's
is
one of the
working.
first times that this has ever
The
been tried
execution
with
of
a
an
civilian
Angular
airplane.
application starts from the angular.json file. This file, as already discussed earlier, is used to define all the standards and paths for your
Civilian
Angular
airplanes
project.
are typically not
Also,
quite as structurally
Angular.json
robust
file
as
specifies
military
which
aircraft,
main.ts and
and the military
index.html file
aircraft
has
tend
to be
to have their own
executed.
specialized data
So as you
links.
can
One of
see
the
on the
barriers
screen, I have
to
both the index.html
transitioning wake
and the
surfing technology into
main.ts
the
file
commercial sector
present in the
is
angular.json
the
file.
cost that would be
Now, once
required
this
to equip a
main.ts
lot
file
of
is
different airplanes
detected,
with a
it is
specialized
compiled
data link.
as it contains the code that is
Currently,
required
the air
to
traffic control
bootstrap or
system
start off the
uses
Angular
ground-based
application.
radar to track aircraft.
From this
and
main.ts
ground-based
file,
radar have
Angular
a fairly
moves to the
slow
app
sweep
module.
rate, so you only get a
So this
position
app module is
update from an
present in
aircraft
the
about once every
appmodule.ts
12
file.
seconds.
So
And you
once
can
the
imagine a
main.ts
typical
file is
airliner flies
executed,
quite a large
it moves
distance
on
in
towards
12
the
seconds.
appmodule.ts file. The
Automatic
appmodule.ts file
dependent
consists of
surveillance
all the components
broadcast
that are
is an
required by
improvement
an
upon
Angular
that, where the
application.
airplane transmits its
These are the
position and
components
velocity
that Angular
information
needs to know in
twice per
order to
second,
run
and
the
it can be very
application.
accurate if
So
the
in case
airplane
you
is
create
equipped
any
with
component,
GPS.
it has
So
to be
what we're
declared
interested in
within the
looking at
declaration
is, can
array
we use
present in
this
the ng
new
module
data link,
decorator.
ADSB, that the FAA has
Angular will check for
mandated
this bootstrap array,
for all
and
airplanes
then it
operating
moves
in
on
Class
towards
A,
the
B,
app
and C
component.
airspace by
So the app
2020.
component is present in the
Can we use that data
app.component.ts file.
link for an
The
application such as wake
app.component.ts file
surfing?
specifies
We were
the
using
selectors,
the data
the
link
template
ADSB
URLs,
between
as
the
well as
two
the style
vehicles,
URLs.
predicting where
All the
that
components
wake
that
would
are present
be,
in an
and
Angular
then
application
flying
are
near that
related to
wake
this root
to try to
component.
gain efficiency.
The
In
app
doing
root
so, we were
selector is
really trying
present in the
to also
index.html
prove
file.
that we could use
So to summarize it,
ADSB
I
as
can
a way
say
to
that
do
the execution
coordinated
begins from
flight
main.ts
between
and then
multiple
it's
vehicles.
passed on
If
to
you
the
wanted to, for instance,
appmodule.ts file.
avoid the wake, you could still
Following
fly
which, the
closer than what is
app.component.ts
currently
file is
allowed by the
executed.
FAA, so that you
So
could
like I've
have
already
an
mentioned
increase
before,
in
Angular
aircraft
is
density.
built on
What we're
TypeScript.
doing is looking at taking
Before
the next
moving
step,
on
and
further
rather
in
than
this
trying to
session, I
avoid
would
the
like
wake,
you
we're
guys to
trying
get
to fly
familiar with
in a
TypeScript.
particular portion
In
of the
case
wake
you're
that
already
has an
familiar with
updraft.
TypeScript,
The
you can
wake
skip this part
consists
and
of two
move on
parts.
towards the
The
next
outboard
part.
parts, the air is
Under this
rising,
section,
and in the
I'm going
center
to
of
show
the
you
wake,
guys
the
how
air
to
is
install
falling.
TypeScript
So if you fly
3.4,
in the area where
and
the
then
air
the
is
basic
rising,
types that are
it's like
available in
gliders that
TypeScript:
soar in thermal
variables,
updrafts. You can
type
extract
assertions,
energy from
functions,
that.
classes,
Flying
and
on the outboard
interfaces.
part, the
So to begin
upwash,
with,
allows
let's move on
a
and see
trailing
how you can
airplane to
install
retrim
TypeScript on
itself
your
at a
system.
lower angle of attack,
To install
which
TypeScript, just
reduces
open up
its
your command prompt.
induced drag.
So
The less
TypeScript
drag you
is
have,
programming
the
language
less
that was
engine
developed by
thrust that you
Microsoft,
need,
and it is
the less
basically
engine
a
thrust you
superset
need,
of
the less fuel
JavaScript.
you have to burn.
With TypeScript,
And of course, the
Angular
less fuel you
projects
burn,
can be
the
created
fewer
using
emissions come out the back of the
object-oriented programming
airplane. So
model.
the ultimate
The
objective
TypeScript
of
programming
flying in
language
the
is
upwash
designed for
portion of the wake
development of
is to
large
reduce
applications.
the fuel burn and the
However,
emissions
it needs
of
to be
the trailing airplane.
transcompiled to JavaScript as the browsers understand JavaScript only. This process of converting TypeScript into JavaScript is called as transpilation. While using TypeScript, you can make use of any of the JavaScript libraries. Also, any code you write in JavaScript will be valid in TypeScript, as you can convert JavaScript code into TypeScript by simply changing the extension from .js to .ts. Also, TypeScript is not platform specific. It can be used on any
by
browser,
positioning
device,
ourselves
or
about
operating
4,000
system.
feet back,
So what
and
is
then
the difference
to the
between
side
TypeScript
of
and
and
JavaScript?
above where we estimated
TypeScript
where
is
the
an
wake would be. And then
object-oriented
we would take what's
programming
called a
language,
tear,
whereas
which is just a
JavaScript is
test
just a
point. It's
scripting
vocabulary
language.
used from the wind tunnel,
TypeScript can support
where you
static
take
features,
data with the
modules,
wind off
interfaces,
in the
etc.
wind tunnel
But
and compare that
JavaScript,
to a
on the
wind
other
tunnel.
hand,
We were
has no
going to
support for
compare
any of these.
flight
So to
outside the
install
wake and
TypeScript on
flight
your
inside the
systems,
wake. And
all
then
you
we
have to
would
do is
step
open up
in
the command
and
prompt
down to where
and
we
then type
estimated
in the
where the
command
wake
npm
was.
As we get
install
closer to the wake, what we're doing is we're looking at
-G
the data from the
TypeScript.
instrumentation that we have on board to try to determine if we're getting into the
And then you
wake's
hit
area
enter.
of influence. It's difficult to see that in fuel flow until you get deep into the wake, but what you can start to see, because one
So as
area
you can
of the
see,
trailing airplane
TypeScript
is
has been
experiencing
installed
more
on my
upwash
system.
than the other wing,
Next
it
up,
tends
you're
to
going to
cause the
check for the
airplane to
version
roll.
of TypeScript.
And so our
To do that, just
experimental
type in
autopilot was
TSC
designed to
hyphen
trim
hyphen
that out.
version.
And so when we looked at the
And hit enter.
roll command that our
Okay, I just made a
autopilot
spelling mistake
was
in
having
here.
to put in,
It's
we could
version.
tell that it was starting to sense
So as you
where
can
the
see
wake
over here,
was and starting
the version of
to have to do
TypeScript that
some
has
work
been
in order to
installed
trim
is
its effects out.
3.7.5. Now, to write some TypeScript code, you'll have to open up a file in Visual Studio. To do that, what I'm going to do is just type in code, followed by the name of my file. So I'll just say
We're going to do a
example
5-foot step in
1.
to crash recommend.
Do not forget to add in the extension that is .ts.
2, 1, Getting a little bit of a
So as you can see on the screen, a new file has been opened, wherein I can write my TypeScript code.
just a little bit.
So what I'm going to do over here is simply write
So
one
wake surfing,
function that is
particularly
going
for
to return
commercial
something to the
aircraft, has
console.
a number of
So for that,
barriers
I'll just type
to
in
its
function,
adoption. One of the prime ones
which
is
is a
passenger
keyword,
ride quality.
and
You
then
can't
this will
see
be a
it,
log
but
function.
the aircraft can
And
feel
I'll
it.
just pass
When
the
you fly
parameter,
in the
say
wake of another airplane, there's the potential that
Within
there
this
are
function,
some
I'll have a
unsteady
simple
aerodynamics
console.log statement,
that cause some vibration in the
which is
wing
going
that
to
gets
log something to my
transmitted
console.
to the passenger's seat, and they'll feel some vibration. So maybe something
Next,
similar to light
I'm going to
turbulence.
define
And
A,
so we
so
have
I'll just
special
say
instrumentation
variable
on
A,
board to measure
and I'll just say
sound
hello world.
levels within the cabin of the airplane, as well as vibration in the seat
Once
rails,
this is done,
so that
I'll
we
have to
can
call the
then
log
use
function.
some
So I'll just say log of
metrics
A.
on passenger ride quality
I'll save
to
this and I'll
evaluate
get
what
back
would
to
the
my
comfort
command
level
prompt.
be, or the degradation
Now,
comfort
to
level be
convert this
when
into
you're doing wake
JavaScript,
surfing.
you'll
So
have
that's
to
one
call
of
the
the concerns
TypeScript
that we're trying to
compiler
answer.
using the
Another
TSC
is, what are the effects on
filename.ts
aircraft
command.
structure?
So
Typically,
here,
airplanes
the
are
file name
designed
is
for flying
example11,
in
so
a
I'll just
continuous
type in
airfield,
TSC,
not necessarily
example
flying in the vortex of another airplane for any long
11.ts.
period of time. It doesn't do any
So
good
now, the file
to
has been
implement a
converted,
technology that saves
or the
fuel
file
if it
has been
requires the
transpiled.
operator to do more
So
maintenance and
basically,
to take
when
the
you do
airplane
this,
out of
the
service
TypeScript
more
code will be
frequently so that they
converted
can
to
inspect it
JavaScript,
and replace
but by
parts and
using
things like
Angular,
that. We want to
you
make
will not
sure
have to
that
do this
this
manually.
technology doesn't
The
wear the
Angular
airplane
CLI
out
will
quicker
automatically
than it
call
would
the
normally.
TypeScript compiler and perform transpilation when you use the ngserve command. So now if you want to execute this file, you'll have to type in node followed by the file name .js. So I'll just type in example 11.js.
What we're noticing on this flight,
So as you can see over here,
is
the
that
transpiled
the power
JavaScript has
required
returned
to
the
maintain a
output.
constant
Now
position
in case you want to view
when
what
our
is
wingtip
present
is
in
in
that
the wake
example.11.js file,
than
all
it
you have
is
to do is
required
just
when
type
we're
in
not in
code
the wake, which means we're going to save fuel, which is that's the idea.
For aircraft that are flying 16 to 18 hours a day, it's a lot of fuel.
Okay, so as you
even
can
to
see,
save 1
here
or
is the
2%.
transpile code.
And so that's
The
what
code that we have
were
written
looking
is in
at was
TypeScript, but the
ways
code that has
you
been
could improve the
transpiled to
efficiency of
JavaScript is
vehicles
present in example
by not changing the vehicles
11.js
at all,
file.
but by
So I hope you
changing
guys are clear with
how we
this.
use them or
In case you have any
operational
problems with the
efficiencies.
functions or the syntax, do not worry because I'll be covering each of these later on in the session. So the first thing that I'm going to be discussing over here is the basic types that are present in TypeScript. TypeScript supports almost the same data types that are present in JavaScript. These can be Boolean, numbers, strings, arrays, tuples,
I was
enum,
even
any,
surprised by
void,
some of the
null,
flight
and
dynamics
undefined,
and
never,
things that we
object,
saw
and type
in flight.
assertions.
There really is
Now,
no
in case you're coming
substitute
from
for taking an
JavaScript
experiment
background,
to flight.
you guys will be very much familiar with the VAR
You
keyword.
learn things that
But please
sometimes
make a
you
note
don't want to learn.
that in TypeScript, it
but
is
you
better
also
to make
see
use of the
the
let keyword
beauty
rather
of
than the VAR keyword.
real atmosphere
The let
and
keyword
the
was
challenges that
included
are
in
associated
JavaScript
with
in
real
ECMAScript
vehicles being
2015
flown
and
by
is considered as a
real
standard
systems
as let is much safer
and real
compared
pilots.
to VAR.
So
now let's move
you
on
can
and take a
do
look
lots
at
of
each of
simulation,
these.
and you
So
can do
the
lots of
first basic
experiments,
type
but
that I'm
you
going to be
eventually have to take
discussing
it to
over here
flight.
is the
And that was
Boolean
really
data
the
type.
focus of
As many
of
of
this
us know,
experiment was,
Boolean data type
even though
refers
there were
to
lots of
true or
predictions
false
that
values.
were well
In
sustained,
TypeScript, it is
we wanted to
preceded
take
by
it
a
all the
Boolean
way to
keyword.
flight to find out
So
the
before
things
writing down the
that we
Boolean
don't
type,
know,
what I'm going to
because you're
do is
often
show you how to
surprised
declare
by,
the types in
things
TypeScript.
you don't know.
So the
based
first
on the
method
results
is
of
to
these
make use of the
flight
VAR
tests,
keyword
we believe
followed
that,
by the identifier
we'll be able to show a significant amount of drag reduction and also make a determination
and
as
then
to
a
whether the
colon
ride
symbol,
quality associated with that level of
the
drag
type of
reduction
variable,
degrades the passenger comfort level or not.
followed by an equal to sign, and then comes the value. So this is the first method. The second one is much similar, but you can omit the value present over here. So I'll just copy this, paste it over here, followed by a semicolon. The third way is to simply specify the value without specifying the type. So I'll just copy that. And instead of type, I'm going to have the value. And instead of the colon symbol, will be an equal to symbol. The fourth method is declaring neither the value nor the type.
Feeling weighed down?
In this case,
Feeling
the
the
data type of
constant
that
pull to
variable
the
becomes
earth?
any, which
We all
means
are.
you can
It's
initialize
gravity,
any type
and
of
it's a
value
part
to
of
that
every
variable.
single thing we do,
So I can
including
just
our
have
science.
a variable,
But what if we're
followed by the
250
identifier,
miles above Earth, aboard the
and then a
International
semicolon.
Space Station,
So
a
these are the
laboratory
four
like
methods
no other
in which
that
you can
offers
declare
something we
variables
can't
in
get on our
TypeScript.
home planet?
So before this, we were actually talking about Boolean. So in case I want to create a variable holding Boolean values, all I have to do is type in let. I'll call the variable as b. I'll specify the type to be Boolean. And I'll give the value as false. So as you can see over here, Visual Studio will also give me details about what this actually is. So when I hover over b, it says that b is a Boolean type variable. So in case I want to print out the value of b, all I'm going to do is type in console.log.
My name is Dr. Serena Anand Chancellor, NASA astronaut. I recently flew to the International Space Station aboard Expedition 56 and 57. My name is Dr. Serena Anand Chancellor, NASA astronaut. I live in microgravity for 197 days when I was on orbit.
Okay,
so many
now
people
my file is
ask, what is microgravity?
Now to execute this
Why do you
file, all I'm
float
going to
on
do
board
is
the
just type
International
in
Space
node,
Station? Gravity
file name
acts
that is
upon all
exm2
objects. We're never
dot
truly
JS.
at zero gravity on board
So
the
as you can
space
see,
station.
the
But
value
because the
is
space
false.
station is traveling
The
so
next basic
fast
type that's
around the
present in
surface of the Earth,
TypeScript is
we're
numbers.
actually in a constant free
So in
fall.
TypeScript,
And that's why
numbers are nothing
everything
but
and
floating
everybody
point
appears
values,
to
and
float
TypeScript
on board the
supports
space
all types
station.
of numbers such as
We
octal,
are experiencing
binary,
the Earth's
hexadecimal,
gravity. In fact,
etc.
we're actually
To declare any of
experiencing about
these, you can make use
90%
of the
of what
numbers
you all
keyword.
experience on
So
the
in case
surface
I
of the
just
Earth.
change the value
The
from
difference is
Boolean
we're just
to
moving
number,
so fast that
and
as
this
we
will not be
fall,
false. This
we
will be
actually
some value,
fall
say
around
10.
the Earth,
And I'll
and
just
that
change the name
defines
of the
orbit.
variable, I'll say
So
call it C.
microgravity means we're not,
then instead of
it's not
logging
the
B, I'll
absence
log
of
C.
mass, which of course
Okay,
creates
so now let's
gravity,
transfile our
but
file.
all the objects together are in the same gravitational
And
field
then
and all falling
I'll type in
together.
node
So yes, it is a lot of fun.
exm2.js.
Floating around, of course, is
Okay,
one of
so
the
as you can see,
exciting
the
parts of
value
being
of
up
C
here
is
on
10.
board and
In
being
case
an
you want to
astronaut, but
specify
even more importantly, it
hexadecimal,
lends
octal,
itself
or
to all
binary
the amazing
values, you can do it in
experiments
a
that we
similar
can do
manner.
on board that
So
take
let me just
advantage
take
of
an
that
example of
microgravity
hexadecimal
environment to
value.
do things
So I'll just type in
that we
let
can't do on Earth,
D,
but that can
which is a
benefit
number,
life back on Earth.
The important thing is it's so different
0,
than what we have here on the
1,
ground,
2,
where
3.
everything is
So
pulled by
this
the
is an
Earth at
example
what we
of
call
an octal
one
value.
force of
The
gravity.
small
And
o
what
that you
that
see over
does
here specifies
is it
that this is an
allows
octal
you to
value.
see the
Similarly, if you
small
have to
forces,
specify
the
binary
small
or
processes,
hexadecimal
the small
values, all
effects
you
of
have to
what
do
goes
is
on
change
in
this by B
life
or
cell
X.
development,
So now let's move on
technical
towards the next
processes
type,
like
which is
combustion or
strings.
fluid flow.
Strings are used
And
to
it
work
helps you
with textual
understand
data.
things that
In
you may not have
TypeScript, you
fully
must use
understood on
string
Earth,
keyword to
where
specify them.
you see something
Say for
happening,
example, I have a
something
variable
assembling
say
or
name.
disassembling, or the shape of
So I'll
something
type
now going
name,
into 3 dimensions,
colon,
and you learn,
string.
that's really what was
I'll just
driving
change the
this thing
variable
on
name
Earth
since
that
I've
we
already
didn't really
declared this
understand.
before. So I'll just call it as first name.
On Earth, gravity is
This is going
affecting
to be a
all
string,
research we do, and
I'll just
sometimes that
specify
can get
the
in the
name as
way.
Edureka.
Studying things in different environments
So this is how
can
you
give a better
specify
picture of
strings.
how they work.
Now in case you want to
From
execute
diseases
this,
to
all you have to
fires
do
and
is get
even
back to
things
your
that
command
make up
prompt,
products like
transpile
milk
your
or
file,
shampoo.
and then
One of the main
make use
things we
of the node
perform on the
command followed by the
ISS
name
is
of the file
science. In fact,
.js
probably
to
70
execute
to
this.
80% of our day
So now moving
is
on
performing
towards the next
scientific
basic type,
experiments.
which is arrays.
The
TypeScript
International Space
supports
Station
arrays
is
just
a
like
great place to
JavaScript.
do
You
research
can
for
declare
several
them in two ways.
perspectives.
The
One of
first
those is
is to
it's
use
a
the
big,
type of
huge
the element
satellite
followed by
orbiting the
square
Earth. So
brackets
if you have an
or
instrument
an
that wants
array,
to look at the Earth or
or
look out at
specify
space,
them within
we
angular
provide
brackets.
the power, we provide the
Okay,
data,
so I'll
the
just clear this
platform
from
for
here.
it. You don't have to go do your own new
And I'll take two
satellite.
new variables. I'll say
The
let
outside of the ISS is
AA,
also a very extreme environment, and sometimes you learn things by exposing your hardware, your polymers or whatever to a different environment. You'll see something happen different than what is on the Earth. But probably one of the most pervasive uses of the ISS is just the microgravity environment, the things that we do inside the ISS to be able to do your experiment in space without gravity, which we've all lived with forever here on the ground, which we live with every day, and we don't even realize how it governs so many things that happen around us. If you take gravity away, now some of the small phenomena, some of the small processes and forces start to come out, and you can see them, and you can see the behaviors of your experiment happening differently in space and in microgravity than you would on the ground.
It takes a lot of people to make all of that microgravity science happen.
So this means
4,000 scientists, companies, and students from over 100 countries have sent more than 2,700 experiments to the orbiting laboratory. Over the past 20 years, these studies have unlocked new discoveries and even kicked off hundreds of new microgravity experiments.
Okay, so the next type
We're
that I'm going to
studying
be
the
discussing
physiology
over here is
of how blood flow and
allows you to define a set
the
of
fluids in our
named
body
constants.
shift as a result of microgravity.
Yesterday, I spent some time setting up a veggie experiment. We'll actually be growing Mizuna lettuce up here.
Drew and I actually have been helping start a new experiment called the Cold Atom Lab, which will create one of the coldest places in the universe right here on the space station, almost at absolute zero.
But
who are these
scientists? And how do they get their research to the space station?
The value of this variable
we'll take you behind the scenes of the years of preparing an experiment for space.
When you should actually
You'll see it launch off the planet and splash back down in the ocean, and hear what it's like to hand off your research to the astronauts who serve as the eyes and hands of the scientists aboard the International Space Station.
By using the const keyword, the code becomes foreseeable and helps in reasoning out the flow of data. So now the enum type. Enum in TypeScript allows you to define a set of named constants.
Project that's going up to the station, and our first project working with anyone involved in the space program. So it's a very exciting time for us.
You can use both
interesting to see how all of our planning is played out when someone else has the experiment in their hands.
Let me take an example of a numeric enum. So what I'm going to do is just type in enum, which is the keyword, followed by fruits, and then I'll just call this enum as fruit.
These two tanks are
Now
from
what
the
I'm going to do is
Spheres
specify
slosh experiment,
some
which we've
values
been working
with
on up here.
So the first value is going to be apple.
Microgravity has a lot to teach us.
Apples to
Take
1.
these containers.
Now I'll discuss
the green
why I'm
liquid
doing this
inside
later on.
is showing us how
Now let me
fuel
take another
swirls
fruit,
around in a
banana
tank while it moves through space.
Mango.
What we learn could
finally
help
an
us
orange.
design safer, more efficient spacecraft.
So this is how you declare an enum. The numeric enum that you see over here
At any
has
given
apple
time, we're
initialized to
conducting
1.
close to
The other
300 different
members are
experiments aboard the
auto-incremented,
International
having the
Space
values
Station.
2, 3,
Research
and 4.
like this is
In
preparing
other words,
us for the future
fruit
of space
apple
exploration.
has the value 1, banana has 2, mango has 3, and orange has 4. However, it is not necessary that you have to specify any value to this. In case I just remove this value, then apple will be initiated to value 0, banana would be 1, mango would be 2, and orange would be 3 respectively. This auto-incrementing behavior comes in handy when we do not care about the member values, but do care that each member has a distinct value in that enum. In case I want to return
really
the value
can't
of any
mimic
of these,
the
what I need to
environment
do
on the
is
space
just
station anywhere
type in
on this planet. And it's
console.log.
what makes it such a special place and why
Okay, before
scientists
this,
from many
let's take
universities,
a new
several
variable.
companies like to send their
just call it
science up. Because once you remove gravity, many things
This is going to be a string.
This season,
then
we're exploring
I'll
why
call
we
it
send
fruit
science to
of
space and what it takes to get it there.
I'll log the
Spoiler
fruit
alert,
name.
you don't have to be a rocket
Let me just save
scientist
this,
to conduct
get back to
research
my
in
command prompt.
microgravity.
And over here,
So this is our
I'll transpile
first
this file.
project that's going
So
up to
now
the
to
station,
execute it, I'll
and
just
our
type
first project
code
working with anyone
exam2.js.
involved in the space program. So it's a
So as
very
you can
exciting
see
time
over
for
here,
us.
the
The
fruit
transition
that is
from
initiated
what am I
to
doing
do
with my life
is
in
mango.
the middle of graduate school
So I hope you guys have
to
understood
here
this.
I am sitting
so now moving on towards the next
in
type,
Houston
which is
getting
any.
ready for our
The
launch.
any
I can't
type
hardly
is
believe
used
that
when you
it's
do
actually
not know
happening.
what is the
Meet
data type
Elaine,
of the element.
one of the
This
co-founders
usually
of
happens when you're
Tempanogen,
dealing
a medical
with
device
dynamic
startup
values
based
and you
in
do
Virginia.
not want to encounter
Her company
compile
is
time
developing
errors
a gel
in
patch
case the
that can
type of
serve
the
as a
element
replacement for
generated is
eardrum
not
repair
as that you
surgery.
assumed.
That could
Any
have
data
huge
type
benefits
allows you
here
to
on Earth.
opt in and
But
opt
launch
out
that
of
gel to
type checking
space,
during
and the
compilation.
opportunities for
So in
use
case you want
grow
to declare
even
a
more.
variable of any type, all you have
First,
to do
we have
is
to
just
back up a
type
few
in
steps.
let, followed by
Putting
the
your
name of
life's
the
work
variable
on top of a rocket
and
may
specify
seem
any.
like a daunting task.
So now
But there's a
the
system in
variable
place to
AG
help
can hold
scientists
any
who
value
know
such as
nothing about
numbers,
spaceflight
strings,
get their
etc.
research into orbit.
So over here,
You
if I
see,
just specify
NASA and its
AG
international
equals
partners
10,
aren't the
and
only
also
source of
AG
science aboard the space
equals the
station.
string,
The
say
ISS
Edureka,
U.S. National
you
Laboratory
can see that it's
creates
not showing
pathways
any
to
errors.
space for
But in case
companies,
I change this from any to
universities,
say
and
number,
even young students.
you can see that
If
when
you're
I
starting a
assign
journey
string
into
to
the
this,
unknown,
it throws
it helps
an
to
error.
have an expert at your
So I
side to
hope you guys are
navigate
clear
the
with
way.
this.
The National Lab
Now
connects
moving on towards the
researchers
next
with
type, which is the
implementation
object
partners
type.
who provide resources and guidance for taking an experiment from Earth to microgravity.
This means it
Elaine
can
and
be
her
any
team
type
are
which is
working
not
with
a number,
nanoracks.
a string,
They have the plate
boolean,
reader
symbol,
on the space station
null,
that's
or
going to be used for our project, and
In case you
they're
want to declare
coordinating
an
the launch,
object variable,
getting all the
all you have
materials
to do
together
is
for
make
us.
use of the
We're
let
glad that we're
keyword.
working
Let me
with
just
them
clear
because
this.
we're glad that somebody has done this before.
Specify the name of the
Help us
variable
along with the process.
and then type an object.
643.
So this is how you declare
The project
object
that we're
types in
sending to the
TypeScript.
space station is
So
looking
before
at how
moving on further,
hydrogels
let me
behave
clearly
in microgravity
differentiate between the
conditions.
let and
And
the
we're
var
specifically
keyword.
looking at
So
how
what I'm going
the
to do
structure
here is
changes
just
and
create
how
a
drug
function.
release profiles change in the
And then
absence of gravity.
I'll specify
My
some
name is
name. I'll just call this as my
I'm
func.
co-founder and co-inventor of this
And
technology,
within this, I'll have a for loop.
I've been with Team Panogen
And
since day
first I'm going
zero.
to take the var
Hydrogels
keyword
are
or the var
very
keyword.
important
variable
materials.
I,
They are
initiate
high
it to 1
volume
until
water
I
that can
is
very
less
well
than or
mimic the
equal to 2.
extracellular matrix
And then I
of our body. So we really thought that
So until this
answering
condition is
this
met,
question
what I want to
can
do is just
really
log
help the
the
scientific
message
community.
saying welcome to Edureka.
Confused?
So I'll say console.
Don't worry, we've got you
log,
covered.
and I'll
Think of
type in the string,
hydrogels like
which
a
is
scoop
welcome
of
to
gelatin.
Edureka.
Not quite a liquid,
So after that is done,
not quite a
I'll
solid,
take another console
definitely made up
statement.
of mostly water. We can use
And I'll
hydrogels
just
to
type in
cover
the final
wounds
value
and
of
even
I.
deliver antibiotics to promote healing. For that reason, hydrogels
come
are
out of
being
the
studied for
function,
use for things
and I'll
like
call
wound
this
care for
function.
soldiers on battlefields.
So now let me
If you
just
are
save
far
this,
away from a hospital
get back
or a
to my
clinic
command prompt,
and you can't get
execute
good
this.
medical care right away, and that soldier has a wound, could you
So as you
apply
can see
that
over here, the string
hydrogel directly
welcome to
to the wound
Edureka has
site
been
and
returned 2
begin to
times.
treat any
This is
infection
because
that might be
the value
coming
of
on?
I at
What about in
first was
space,
1,
though? What if we are
and
far
until
away
the
from
value
Earth's
of
surface
I
on our way
is less
towards
than or
Mars,
equal to 2,
and we also
I
have
wanted
another
it
wound
to
on an
print the
arm or a
string
leg,
welcome to
and we need a
Edureka.
better way to
So
treat that
therefore,
wound and make sure
welcome
it
to
doesn't become
Edureka printed
infected.
twice,
So
followed by
Tympanogen,
the
the
final
hydrogel
value
itself,
of
is a
I.
great
Okay,
example
I've
of
not
a
specified the
dual-purpose
final value of
technology.
I.
It's something we
Let me
can
just
use
do that
not
over
only
here
on the Earth,
by
but up in
specifying
space.
a plus sign.
This research
And then
could
I.
provide
Sorry for
previously
that.
unknown
I'll
foundations for future
retranspile it
hydrogel
and
studies.
execute the function.
It's a great example of how microgravity can
Okay,
offer
so
new
here it is.
insights
The
into
value of
systems
I
we've
is
already
3.
explored on Earth.
So now let's see what will happen
The
if I
data that we're
change this
collecting
var
is
to let.
so basic science that
And I'll type in let.
it's hard to find those sorts of
So as you can
projects
see
at
over
this
here,
stage
the
as a
scope
researcher.
of
That's
I
really
is
exciting
not
for us
going
as well.
beyond this for
And it's
loop.
in space.
The I that is present outside this for loop
And when it
throws
gets
an
to
error.
space,
So I
it
hope
goes
you
into
guys
the
have
hands of
understood this.
astronauts
Now
who
this
will
is why
run the
the let
experiment
keyword
in
is
orbit.
considered to be more safer
Just like
than
training
the
for
var
launch,
keyword.
landing,
I
and
is visible
spacewalks,
only
crew
within the
members
for loop,
participate in
which is
hours
the
of
nearest
scientific
block,
training to
and if you
prepare
try
them
to
for
access
running
it
many of
anywhere
the hundreds of
outside it,
experiments
it
that
is
are
not
ongoing
possible.
aboard the space
However,
station.
even if you compile
Ready
it
to go to
after
class with
changing
an
from var
astronaut?
to let, the
We'll take you
compiler will
along.
compile it and convert it into JavaScript. The JavaScript file
Well, a lot
can be
had
executed
changed
to return
in
the corresponding
11
output.
years since he was
Let
up
me
there.
just save this.
There was a
get
new
back to the
experiment,
console,
so he hadn't seen that either. They
and
tell
I'll
us,
transpile this file again.
you know, hey, this is a lot easier if you
So
just
as you can
upside
see
down.
over here,
You know,
it
you're
has
going to be in
thrown an
microgravity
error
and this will work
saying
differently.
cannot find the name I. So I hope you guys are clear with this. So now moving on towards something very important, with is type assertions. When you declare some variable with a type, you will see that TypeScript will
Hi,
assist
I'm
you
Terry Virts,
on all the
and I
available
want to talk
methods
about
that you
floating
can
in
use
space.
along with it.
One of the first things that you need
TypeScript
to
also
realize
allows
when
you
you
to
get into
declare a
space
variable without
is that
specifying
even though
its
you
type.
feel like
So what I'm
you're
going to do over
falling,
here is
you're
just
not.
take an example.
You can let
So
go
let me just take a new
and you
variable.
float. It's not a problem. It's
my
something you really have
variable
to train your brain to
of
think
type
about.
string
Another thing that you
holds
need
some
to
value, say
learn when
Edureka.
you first get into space is
Now,
how
the moment I
little
specify
force is
my
required to
variable,
move you.
followed by a
And
dot
another
symbol,
cool thing is
you will
could
see
be on the ceiling.
TypeScript has given a
Makes
list
it very
of all
easy
the
when you're
functions
working.
that
You
I
have to
can
get
use
some
along
work
with
done
this
up here. You just go
variable.
up on the
Now,
ceiling
in
and
case
get
I
your
do
work
not
done.
specify the type of this function, so what I'm going to do is just delete this, and then when I type in this function followed by a dot symbol, you will
Our
see
team of
that
scientists
this is
is
of
busy
any
getting
type
their
and it does
experiment
not
ready
give
for
you any
launch.
suggestions.
At the same time, NASA is preparing the space scientists who will operate the experiment aboard the International Space Station.
So as astronauts on board the space station, we are the hands and eyes of the researcher. They are telling us how best to do the science, but it's up to us to make sure that science runs correctly.
Astronauts train all over the world, including at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. Here, they learn not just how to live in space, but also how to conduct science in microgravity.
So many folks ask, how much training did you do before launching to the space station? And the answer is many years. So we train in a lot of big areas. Number one is systems on board the ISS, robotics, how to do spacewalks, and actually science itself. Now, we don't learn about a lot of the science experiments we're doing until we get up there. But what they are teaching us is scientific techniques.
The techniques astronauts learn range from using tools like pipettes and microscopes in microgravity to operating scientific hardware aboard the space station. For example, we study combustion aboard the station because it behaves differently in microgravity. You wouldn't want fire to get free inside your home in space, though, so we've created special facilities to contain it.
So that was about
If it looks
type
complicated,
now
it's because it is.
The next topic,
And it's just one of the pieces of equipment astronauts must master before they go to the space station.
Functions allow you to build up
Hi, I'm Tracy
of your program
this is Sharon
that deal with
Ranke, and
abstraction,
we're in PDL2 right now,
etc.
and we're
In
down here
TypeScript,
at
functions play a
JC
very
to
important role in describing how
fluids
to
and
do
combustion
tasks.
facility
Another
training for
advantage
the
is that
combustion integrated
TypeScript
rack,
also
and
adds
this
some
is
new
the rack.
capabilities to standard
So basically,
JavaScript
PDL2 is
functions
a
to make them
mock-up
easier to
of
work
the
with.
US lab.
In
Since
TypeScript,
2008,
you can
we've
create
been coming
functions
down
both with the name
and
or as
training all
anonymous
the crew members
functions, just
who
like JavaScript.
will do
This will
payloads
let you choose
on the
most
space
ideal
station.
approach for your
We've been training
application.
cosmonauts as well.
So now let's create a function over here.
At this point?
I've already taken a few examples
Probably
before. So I'll just
50?
take a function,
Probably
take
over 50
product,
crew members we've trained.
and I'll pass
Today,
in two
Tracy and
variables
Sharon are
as
back
parameters.
at work with a former student,
Then open up the
NASA
curly
astronaut
braces,
Mike Fink.
and within this, I'll just
This
have a
isn't Mike's
single
first
return
rodeo with the
statement
station,
that is going to
or
return
this
the product
equipment,
of
for that
X
matter.
and Y.
So back in
spelling mistake
2008
over
and 2009,
So this
we
is
were
how you
aboard the
create
International
functions
Space
in
Station on a
JavaScript.
space
You
shuttle,
type in the function keyword,
STS-126
followed by the name of the function and the parameters. Then you have to specify all the statements that come within this function within curly braces.
Brand new,
Now, in case you want to call
ready,
this
fresh
function,
out of the box
simply
combustion
specify the name of the
integration
function
package. Since then,
along with the
friends at Glenn
parameters.
Research Center
I'll just
here
say
at
2,
NASA,
3.
we've been able to
So
get
now,
some
to
fantastic
run this
science
file, all you have to do is
about
get back to your
things
command
burn
prompt,
in space
type in
without graphene,
tsc
without
followed by the
convection,
name of the
things
file,
burn.
and
By
then note
understanding that
followed
better,
by the name of the
we're able to make more
file.js.
fuel-efficient engines
Similarly,
and
if you want to create
things here on
nameless or
planet Earth,
anonymous
helping
functions,
save our energy.
just type in anonymous
So
over
you
here,
can see it in the video.
and then
All the
I'll make use of the let
hoses
keyword
within
and
the
take a
ring,
new variable,
and so they
and
all
to
fit
this,
in nicely,
I'm
so
going
they
to
shouldn't
assign the
interfere
value
with
that
us.
is returned by a function. Now this function is actually
Sounds
a nameless
great and
function
looks
or an
great.
anonymous
Thank
function.
you.
Sorry
So a
guys,
lot
I'm
had
just trying
changed
people
in
do sign over
11
here.
years since he was up
I'm
there.
going to have to save return
So we did
statement
get
for
most of the
this.
information again.
So now let me just save
And
this.
it was a new experiment, so he hadn't seen that either.
.log.
He did great. He's a quick learner. It's great
So
to
now let
work
me get
with,
back
very
to my command
methodical,
prompt and execute
and good humor, which is always, we like to have
So as
fun
you
when
can
we're
see over
training.
here, I have the value of 4 star shift, which is 24.
showing.
So I hope you guys are clear with
I
this.
will be like looking
Functions
and
can
I'm
also
gonna go
refer to
slowly,
those
and that would be your
variables that
chance to
reside
say
outside
no.
the function body.
Yes.
Let me just delete this
We
from
are
here.
watching
So
you
what I'm
right
going to do
now.
over here is declare a new variable
whenever
outside
we
this
can.
function's body.
This isn't
So
the
just
last
call
time Tracy
this
and Sharon
variable
will
to be
work with
y.
Mike.
And
When
I'll
he launches
specify
to the
its value
station and works on
to be.
combustion projects in
Now what I'm
space,
going to do is
they'll watch
return
over his
product
shoulder
of X
through a camera
star
broadcasting
Y
to Glenn
and
Research
give this a
Center in
different name.
Cleveland,
I'll call
Ohio.
this This time
Christina,
I'll
this
return
is
the
Sharon
product
with
of
an
X star
answer to
Y
your question. So
star
they
Z.
do want you to go ahead and install
I'll
the
call the
cable
function.
tie.
Copy all. Thanks for having that down for me.
So as you can see over here, I have the value returned as 45, which is a result of multiplying 3 cross 3
Being
cross
able
5.
to operate and maintain
So I
the
hope you
space
guys are clear
station
with
while
this.
conducting crucial
You
research
can also add
could get
type
overwhelming.
to a function.
Luckily,
In case you want
astronauts
to
have
add
strong
some type to
support
it, all
teams
you
on
have
the
to do
ground
is
and
just
often develop
specify
personal
the type of
connections to the
variable that you
research.
want to give over here.
I was so
So in
impressed
case
at
I
the
want to
different things
specify
we'd
X
be
to be a
working
number,
on,
I'll just
cancer
say
or
X
Parkinson's
colon
or even
number
Alzheimer's
and Y
disease.
colon number.
So as a physician, these meant
You
a
can
lot
also
to me.
have
These
different
personally
types.
were very
So instead of Y
important
having
experiments
number,
that we
you
needed
can
to do.
also
But
have
in
it as a
all
string
honesty, the
or
entire
anything
crew,
else.
not just
So now
myself
talking
as the
about
physician,
something
were
very
excited
important,
about
which is
working on
arrow
these
functions.
experiments.
Arrow functions
You
are
get a little
somewhat
nervous
like
at
lambda
first as
functions
you
of
begin to
Python,
pipette
C#
or
etc.
even utilize a
These functions
microscope,
can
which
be
I
defined
hadn't
in just
used
a
in
single line.
years.
So to
But you
specify
quickly
an
learn
arrow
because you
function
realize
over
how
here,
important
let
it
me
is
just
to
take a new
science, and
variable.
the investigators
this
and
variable as
scientists
dx.
running you through all these experiments were fantastic and just
I'll
walked us
open the
through it every
parentheses.
step of the way.
I'll take in a variable
keep us
A.
posted, but
I'll
Drew and
specify
I
the
are ready to
variable
continue
A,
up.
and then
Good
the
working with
arrow
you guys
function,
today, and I'll see you
just
soon.
log the value of A. So over here, my variable EX over
We got here on
holds
a
the
Thursday,
value of what the function
and
has
it's
returned.
currently Sunday.
A over
We've
here
had a
is
big
the
day yesterday
parameter,
filling
and
up
the action
these
to be
wells
performed
with gel
is
solution
console.log.
and
So
getting
now,
ready for
I'll just get
handover
back to
at
my 7:30
a.m. on
what I'm going to do is just transfer this file
on Tuesday afternoon.
and I'll just open the JavaScript version of this. Okay, so as you can see over here, this is the TypeScript function that I've written. Now, when I open the JavaScript file, you can see that it is much more bulkier compared to that of the TypeScript file. Arrow functions are very useful in terms of reducing the code size. Plus, they can also be served to other methods as inputs. If my function has no parameters, you can also specify them without any parameters. So in case you do not have any parameter, simply leave empty brackets like this.
My name is Dr.
So
Emily Schaller, and I'm here at NASA's Wallops Flight Facility on the Eastern Shore of Virginia. We're here because NASA is using airplanes to study hurricanes. The mission is called HS3, which stands for the Hurricane and Severe Storm Sentinel. What's a Severe Storm Sentinel? It's actually a remotely controlled airplane called the Global Hawk Unmanned Aerial Vehicle, or UAV.
Now it's very important
Pilots
that you
fly
guys
the plane
concentrate
from
on
a
this
cockpit
part
on the
because we're going
ground.
to make use of this syntax in our
NASA is
project
using these
later on.
Global Hawks to
So what
study
I'm going to do here
hurricanes
is
in
just
the
create a
Atlantic
class.
Ocean by
So I'll just type
flying
in the
over
keyword
and
class,
around them.
and I'll name this as my class.
The Global Hawk can fly for very
Next
long
up, I'll
periods
open
of
the curly
time
braces.
at very high altitudes.
Within this, I'll specify
It can
a
fly
class
almost
property.
twice as high
I'll
as
just
a
take a
commercial
variable
jet,
J
and it can
of
fly for
number
over
type.
24
Now
hours
J is
without
nothing but
stopping.
a property of my class. So
That's
next
why
up, I'm going to
scientists
have
are using the
constructor,
Global Hawk for the
and within
HS3
this,
mission,
I'll take a new
so they
variable,
can
say K,
continuously study
and this
storms
is also going
as
to
they
be of
develop.
number type. You can give any types of
Forecasters
your
have
choice.
a pretty good
I'm just
idea of
taking
where
this for
these storms
instance.
go,
Within this
but what they want to
constructor,
know
I'll just
is,
have a simple
will they
statement.
grow?
So I'll say this.
We
dot
spoke with
value of
NASA
J
mission scientists
is
about
equal to
how
K.
the Global Hawk will help improve
Next,
their
I'll declare a
understanding of
function.
hurricane
Let me just call
formation
this as
and
value.
growth, and why it's so
And within
important
this,
for
I'll have
us
a simple
to learn
return
more about
statement.
hurricanes.
That
The
says
Hurricane and Severe
the
Storm
number
Sentinel
is
has a goal to try to better
this
understand the
dot my
processes that control
or
the
this dot
intensity
J.
of storms.
So that is
The
done.
ability to
Now let me
predict the
come out of
intensity is
this
very
class.
important because it
So my
impacts
class is ready.
people in the
But as
coastal
we all
zones
know,
who,
to access
if they're
any of the
anticipating,
variables
say,
or
a
functions
tropical
present
storm, a
within this
Category
class,
1
I'll
storm,
have
and
to
they end up
create an
getting a
object of
Category
this
3
class.
storm,
So to
and
create
it
an
makes a big
object, I'll
difference
have
in
to make
terms of
use
their
of the
ability
new
to
keyword.
prepare
So what I'm going to do
and
is
deal
just
with
take
storm
an
consequences.
object name. I'll say
And this
my
is
object
really important
equals
because a category
which
of a
is the keyword
hurricane
to
is
create
the
an object,
intensity of
followed
the
by the
winds
class name.
associated with a
So my
hurricane.
class.
So a Category 5
My class
hurricane
constructor
is
has one
much more
parameter over here whose
destructive
value I'll
than a
have to
Category
specify.
1. So being
So
able
just
to
specify
predict
the value as
the difference between
Next
just a
up, I'll make
tropical
use of the
storm, a
console.log
Category
statement.
1 up to a
And then
Category
I'll
5
make use of
is
the object, which
really
is my
crucial
object.
to saving
value, which is
lives
function.
and lessening
Okay, now let me
damage
just
and so
execute
forth.
this code.
Particularly saving lives.
The benefit of HS3 compared
as
to
you
any
can
other
see,
hurricane mission
I have
is
the
the fact that
output
we
as
have these
the number
planes
is
able to
6.
fly
So basically,
upwards of
my
24
object over here
hours,
is accessing
and
the
being able
function
to
that is
monitor a
present in my
storm for
class,
that long
and then
period of
it
time and
returns
getting
corresponding
constant
value.
data, we can
TypeScript
actually
classes also
catch
support
changes in the
inheritance.
storm.
Inheritance is the ability
We
of a
will
program to create
use
new
two
classes
Global
from an
Hawks.
existing class.
One
The
Global
class that
Hawk
is extended
flies
to
over
create
vast
newer
areas
classes
around
is
a
called
hurricane.
as
It
the parent class
measures
or the
the
superclass.
environment
The
that a
newly
hurricane
created
is
classes
embedded
are
in.
referred to as
And
the
then the
child or
second
the
Global Hawk,
subclasses.
instead
A
of
class
sampling the
inherits
vast
from
area, it
another
goes
class
right
using
in
the extend
to look at the
keyword.
eye
Child
and the
classes
eye
inherit
wall
all
and the inner
properties
core
and methods
processes
except the
of a
private
hurricane.
members and constructors from the parent class. Another point to be noted over here is that TypeScript does not support multiple inheritance. So what I'm going to do is just create a new file over here. So I'll type code exm3.ts, and over here I'll just type in the syntax of
The Global
inheritance.
Hawk unmanned aerial
what you have to
vehicles
do is
flown by
make use of
NASA
the
were
extend
originally
keyword.
built for
So
the
I'll have the
military
class
and
child,
used for flight testing
followed
at
by the
Edwards Air
extend
Force
keyword,
Base in California.
and then the parent
When the
class.
Air Force was done testing
what I'm
these
going to do is
models,
get back to
they
my
were
previous
transferred to
example.
NASA, which
And
turned
from
the
here,
planes into
I'll just
airborne
copy the first
laboratories
half
to
of
study
code.
the Earth. NASA flew its first science mission with the Global Hawk in
Let me just change the
2010.
name of this class. I'll call
The
it as
Global
new
Hawks are
class.
really a
or
new
parent
aircraft
class.
for doing hurricane studies.
Now, in
Manned
case I
aircraft
want this to
typically
be a
fly
parent
for,
class,
say, 8
what I
to
have
10
to do is
hours
make
when they
some
do a
other
research
class
flight.
inherits this.
Of that 8 to 10
I'll just take
hours,
another
you may
class.
have
I'll
4
call it as
hours or
child
more just getting
or
to and
child
from the
class.
storm, so that in a
Please
typical
make a note
flight, you
that
only
the
get
first
4 to
letter
6
should be in
hours
caps.
actually
I'll
sampling
do it
within
over
the
here
storm.
as well.
With the Global Hawk, we can get 3 times,
This is
sometimes
nothing
even
but
4 times
convention
as
and
much
it's
as you
better
can
to
get with
follow it.
manned aircraft.
So the child class actually
Now this
extends
plane
the parent
It can fly to 65,000 feet. It can fly 13 miles up. It can also fly for nearly 30 hours. So this plane can take off here from Virginia, on the coastline of Virginia, close to where hurricanes form. It can fly all the way to Africa. It can spend about 10 hours on the coastline of Africa and then fly all the way back.
The reason why you're seeing all these red lines over here is because I've not made use of super keywords. So what I'm going to do over
Because
here
the global hawk can fly so high for so long, scientists can study larger areas of the Earth for longer periods of time, in places where planes with pilots on board may not be able to reach.
Okay.
We spoke with pilot Phil
create a
Hall
value class
about the
within the
Global
child
Hawk
class.
and what it's like to fly the plane without actually being inside it.
I'll return the value of K
So the two Global
and the
Hawks that
value
we're
of
flying for
M.
HS3, Air Vehicle 6 and Air Vehicle 1,
Value
from a pilot
parent
perspective, it's a very different aircraft. We don't have any rudder pedals or a control yoke. We actually use a mouse and keyboard.
And
we actually have a control room on the
from
ground. We have two of them now.
is
We have one
plus
at Edwards Air Force Base in California, and we have one here at Walton's Flight Facility in
I'll come out of
Virginia.
this function.
So
I'll
it's
create an
basically like
object
a trailer.
of this class.
It's been specially
I'll say new
designed for
object.
Global Hawk.
And
It's
the name
full
of
of
the class,
computer systems that can
which is
talk to
child
the
class.
aircraft. So we
And
can
I'll
connect
pass
to
in
the
the values
internet,
as 12
and all these satellite
23.
products of Lightning,
And then
the
I'll make use of
storm
the
from
console.log
satellite images, we're able to download that almost real time and use that to actually
And I'll
navigate
call
the
the value
storm.
function using this. So this is
For
how
the
you
first
create
part
child
of the
classes
mission,
in TypeScript.
we actually fly the aircraft
You can also
from
make use
logs.
of access
And once we
specifiers
get
in
about
TypeScript.
2 or 3
They can
hours
either be
into our
public,
flight,
private,
we
or
actually
protected.
transfer control
For
of the airplane
example,
back
if
to
you make the
Edwards Air
parent
Force
class
Base,
variable as private,
NASA
you will
Dryden
see
Flight
that an
Research
error
Center.
will be shown in the
It's very
child class.
different from any
So I'll just
kind
get
of
back
any
to
other
my
kind of
class over
aviation
here.
operation,
And over
in
here,
that we
for
have
this
pilots
property,
on both
I'll just
coasts,
specify this
and we can
as
actually
to be
transfer
private.
control of the aircraft
Now,
during the flight
when I
to the other
type
pilots.
this .j
And
over
when you
here,
have these long
you can see
missions
that
like
TypeScript
26
is
or
throwing an
27
error.
hours,
You can also see the
one person
message
can't
that
sit there
says
for the
property
entire
J
flight.
is
So we
private
actually
and only
have 3
accessible
or 4
within the
shifts
parent
of
class.
people that come and go
Similarly, if I
to
change
man
it
this
from private
aircraft.
to protected,
Now, pilots
you will
know
see
how to
that the
fly
error
planes
disappears.
and they can tell the plane where
now
to
this is
go,
because
but how does a
protected
pilot
members are
actually
visible
know
to child
where
classes
to
as
go?
well.
You
Private
have to have
members
scientific
are
information.
accessible only and only
Now,
within the
scientists
class
sit in
and
a
nowhere
separate
else.
trailer.
So
We
now
have
let's move on
computers
towards
sitting in front of us.
TypeScript interfaces.
We bring in
An
satellite
interface
information.
is a structure
We
that will
bring
contain
in
only the
forecast
declaration of
information.
fields and methods,
And because
and there'll
weather
be
can
no
change
definition
so
of it.
fast,
When
they
some
can
class
collect that
inherits an
information,
interface,
interpret it,
that
and then
class has to
relay it to the
define
pilots
each
and
of them
say,
within
well, instead
the
of
class
going
itself.
over to this point,
I'll
why
create
don't
a
you
new
go
file
over to
over
this
here.
point over here, which is
In
where we
case you
think
want to
the
define
eye
an
has
interface,
relocated.
you'll have to make use of
So
the
it's a
interface keyword
great team
followed by the
between
name
the
of the interface.
scientists and the
I'll
pilots
just
to
specify the
actually
name
get
to
the
be my
most
integer.
information you can out of a flight.
Within this, I'll have a few variables, say S, which is
How
a
can you
number,
become involved in our
T,
mission?
which is a string,
You can follow
and
the
then
plane too,
a function.
just like the
I'll
pilots
just
and
call it as
scientists
my
do,
function.
by participating
Okay,
in
so
live
as you can
chats
see over here,
where you can
none
get
of
live
these have
updates
any
on where
values
the plane
assigned
is
to them,
flying
nor does
right
my
from your
function
own classroom.
have any definition. Now, in
You
case
can
some class
definitely be a part of our
implements this
mission by
interface, it will have to
actually being
specify
able to look at
values
the
to
same
S
screen
and
we're
T
looking
and
at.
also
I'm
redefine my
looking at
function.
where the plane is flying
So let me
with
just take
respect to
a
the
class.
storm, and
I'll call
you
it
have
class
access
A.
to the
To
same
make use
data
of that
I get to look
interface,
at. You
I'll
have
have to
access
use
to
the
see
implements
the
keyword.
plane's
So
altitude, you
implement
can see the
my
wind speeds,
integers.
you can see the wind
So the
direction,
reason why you're
and
seeing an
you
error
can
is
chat
because
live
class
with
A has
pilots,
not
with
redefined
forecasters, mission
anything present
scientists,
within the
and we're
interface. So the
looking at the
moment I
same thing
redefine
you are, and that's
everything
just
present
really
in the
exciting
interface,
to know that you can
the
ask
error
us
will
any
disappear.
question at any
So
time,
what I'm
and
going
we
to
are
do
right
is
there
type
looking at the same
S
thing.
number.
To learn more
And
about our mission, visit nasa.gov/HS3.
And then I'll take
See
a
you next
constructor of
time
this
on
class,
NASA Airborne.
to which I'll pass in the same values, plus S and T. So this dot S is S, and this dot T is T. And then I'll redefine the function, which is my function. So as you can see over here, the moment I've redefined each of these, the error has disappeared from here. So over here, I'll just type in console.log.
We are in Death
Implementing an
Valley
interface.
testing terrain relative navigation, the
And
new
then I'll
technology
return the
for
value
Mars
of both these
2020.
variables.
The
That's
terrain
S and T.
in
So I'll
Death
type in
Valley
this
is very much like
dot
Mars.
S
It has
plus
a lot of
a space
sand
character
dunes and steep
and
slopes.
this dot T.
It's quite similar to
Now
the
I'll
landing
create an
site that
object.
Mars 2020 will be
Let
going to.
object
We're
0
taking a
equals new,
copy
followed by
of
the name
the
of the class,
system
which is
that
A.
will be on the
And then
spacecraft,
I'll have to specify
and we're
two
testing
parameters
it
to this.
in
The
the
first
way
is
that
S,
it
which
would
is a
be
number.
used during
The
the
second
flight
is T,
mission.
which is a string.
Terrain
So for
relative
S, I'll
navigation
just
gives
say
the
1.
vehicle the ability
And for the
to
string,
figure
I'll
out
just
where
say
it
hi.
is. This is kind of
of along the same lines of what the Apollo astronauts did with people in the loop back in the day. Those guys were looking out the window and looking for different craters and other features on the moon that they knew of from the maps we had on the moon. So that way they could figure out where they are and figure out where they needed to land to be safe. So for the first time here on Mars, we're automating that.
What terrain relative navigation gives you is the ability to avoid hazards that you already know about. So large hazards, hills, craters, things that you've seen before. With the camera, we take images as we're descending, And we match
So as you can
pieces
see
of
over here,
the
the
image
values
to
1 and
orbital
high have been
imagery
returned.
that we have stored on
So I
board.
hope you guys are clear
And
with this.
if we make many
So
of
now
these
let's get back
matches,
to Angular.
we are able to
So the next
figure
most
out where we
important
are
thing that you'll have to
relative
know
to
is
the
the
map.
building blocks
If
of
we didn't
Angular.
have terrain
The
relative
building blocks of
navigation,
Angular
the
are
probability of
modules,
landing safely at
components,
Jezero Crater
templates,
is about
metadata,
80
directives,
to
data
85%.
binding,
But with
services, and
Mars
dependency
2020, we can
injection.
actually bring
Modules.
that probability
A
of
module
success of
basically
landing
allows you to
safely at
separate
Jezero
the
Crater
functionality
all the
of
way
your
up to
program into different
99%
parts.
safe every
These
single
parts
time.
are
We don't have an
independent
astronaut
of
that we
each
can
other,
put on
which
board
means
Mars
each
2020.
module's outputs
But we can put this
are
this
completely
system, this
separate
terrain
from
relative
that
navigation
of the
system,
other.
so that
If you make
the
changes to
spacecraft
any
can
of
figure it
these,
out on
the
its own.
change will be made
I can
only
see
to
it
that
being
module
used
and it will
on
not
lunar
interfere
missions,
with those
science
of the others.
missions, as well as
In
human
Angular,
missions.
modules will
Future
allow
Mars
you to group
missions, of
together
course,
other
Mars
building
sample
blocks
return,
such as components,
Europa lander,
directives,
landing on
pipes,
a
and
comet,
services.
pretty much
The
everywhere
modules
you
of
want to
Angular
land,
are
you're
referred
going to
to
want to
as
have terrain
NG
relative
modules.
navigation.
Applications created by Angular are driven by functional sets which collect related data. Therefore, Angular apps are defined by a set of NG modules. NG modules are very much different when compared to those of the JS modules or the JavaScript modules. NG modules declare a group of files that can be parsed and analyzed. You can also make use of other NG modules within one by importing them. Above all, these modules prove to be very much helpful when you're creating large applications that have multiple functionalities. Besides allowing clean creation, these modules also help you minimize the code size by reuse and optional import of the required ones. This is also referred to as lazy loading, meaning you can load any NG module only on your demand. Not to forget, NG modules are also one of the biggest reasons for Angular's popularity. Every application created with Angular will have at least one NG module, which is the root module. This root module is referred to as the app module. So by default, the app module will look something like this.
It's all about matters of the heart.
So let me just get into the project we created initially to show you all what this app module looks like.
The focus of today's show is on matters of the heart
as you can see on
as
the
they
screen,
relate to good cardiovascular health.
Module that has been
we'll take a look
by
at how
Angular.
NASA keeps astronauts'
It is present
hearts
within
healthy
the app
off the Earth.
module.ts file.
And we'll take a look at some of the research being done aboard the International Space Station that can keep all of us healthier here on
module decorator. Decorators basically modify classes or property definitions. They are also referred to as annotations and are JavaScript features. In Angular, these decorators contain some metadata to classes and properties so as to convey what they mean and how they are supposed to function.
Stroke, and high blood pressure
is
the number one killer of men and women across America. Fortunately, many studies have shown that healthy habits, including good nutrition and exercise, are important for maintaining a healthy heart here on Earth.
Of the metadata.
Those habits are even more important for astronauts on the International Space Station. Living in microgravity for 6 months changes our bodies in a number of ways. Without gravity, we lose bone mineral density, our muscles atrophy, and our cardiovascular system gets weaker. Some of our studies have shown that in space, the size and shape of our hearts may actually change, which could make it difficult to do our jobs when we get back to Earth or even land on Mars.
The
on
app
Earth,
component is
our
present
heart
both
and
in the
blood
declarations
vessels are
and
well
in the
adapted to
bootstrap
work
array.
against the
This
downward
app
pull of
component
gravity.
is created by the
In
Angular
space,
CLI
however,
or the command
there's a
line
tendency
interface
for blood and
every
other
default
bodily fluids to
application.
accumulate in the
The
upper
declarations
body.
array present in
Let's
the
take a
module
look at one of
informs
the
Angular about the
consequences of this
components
fluid
that
shift.
belong to that module.
We have recently
When you create
identified
more
that
and
some
more components
astronauts
to your
experience
application,
changes in
all you
their
must do
vision,
is
which might be
add them
related to the
over here.
cardiovascular
Components
system.
cannot be used
Our
without
hearts pump
declaring
blood
them in
around
the
our
NG
body
module
through blood
class.
vessels.
So make sure
Special
you declare every
adaptations in our
component
bodies
you
ensure
create
that fluid is
exactly
evenly
once in the
distributed
NG
despite
module
the pull
class.
of gravity.
If you fail to do so, you're sure to encounter
In space,
an error.
astronauts no longer
The
experience
declarations
the
array can
downward pull
also
of gravity,
contain
and the fluid in their
declarables or
bodies tends
components,
to move towards the
directives,
upper
and
body and the
pipes.
head.
All the modules declarables should
Our
be
cranium
present
is
in
a
the
rigid
declarations
container.
array,
As
and
the
they
fluid
must
moves
belong
towards
to
the
just
head, it
one
causes
NG
the pressure
module.
inside the skull to
The classes
rise.
that are
This is
declared
known as
within one
increased
module are visible
intracranial
only to
pressure.
that module,
The
but they
optic
can
nerve
be
travels from
exported
the
to
brain
other
to the
modules.
eye.
In
The
case you
increased
define some
pressure
other
from the
component,
cranium
you
travels
will have
down the
something
nerve
like
and affects
your
the eye.
component,
It causes the
your
optic
pipe,
nerve to be squeezed, and
etc.
the optic
For
disc
now,
where the optic
I've
nerve
not
meets
created
the
any
eye
of
to
these, so let
swell.
me just remove
The
this
back
from
of the
here.
eyeball flattens as pressure builds
So apart
behind
from
it,
this,
and the blood
NG
vessels in the
module
back
can
of the
also
eyeball
contain
also swell.
exports
These changes can affect the astronaut's vision. One change is that the astronauts become farsighted. A second change is that they can develop cotton wool spots, which represent damage of the nerve fibers in the back of the eye. These can cause discrete areas of vision loss. NASA is working to understand and prevent these changes in astronauts, which may also help us understand and prevent related vision changes here on Earth.
Associated with the HTML template. This HTML template defines the view that is to be displayed. Therefore, components are basically used to control the views of an MVC architecture. The component decorator will tell Angular that the class immediately below is a component and provides the templates and related component-specific metadata. Angular components are the most basic UI or the user interface for your application, and they always are
One of the
associated
tools we
with
have
the
to
template
study
and are a
heart health
subset
aboard
of
the space
directives.
station
The
is an
component's
ultrasound
logic is
device,
defined
which
inside
uses
the class.
harmless sound
This
waves to
basically
take
determines
images
how
of the
it
inside
supports
of our
the view.
bodies.
Components
Those
are
images
created,
can be
updated,
viewed
and
at the same
deleted by
time by
Angular as you
researchers
proceed
and
in your
doctors in
application.
mission control.
Your application can
With
take
minimal
action
training
at
on
each
ultrasound,
moment in
remote
this life
guidance
cycle through
techniques
optional
developed
life
by
cycle
NASA
hooks such
enabled
as NG
astronauts
on
to take
init.
detailed
Life cycle
images
hooks
of their
provide
own
visibility
heart.
into the key
In our
life
next
moments
segment,
and
we'll
the
travel
ability
to a small
act when they
community in
occur.
Brazil
Therefore,
that has
life cycle
benefited from
hooks allow
remote
you to
medicine
control the
techniques
component's
that were
runtime behavior,
advanced by the
and they are called
research
only when
aboard
they
the
are defined.
International Space Station.
Angular provides a number of life cycle hooks such as NG on changes, NG on init, NG do check, etc. NG on changes will respond to Angular's reset data-bound input property.
Minas Gerais is a
The
large
method
state.
receives a simple change object
Our
of current and
territory is
previous
about the
property
size of
values.
France, and
It
we
is called
consist of
before the NG on
853
init
units
method,
and
and whenever
municipalities.
one or more data-bound input
There are
property
large
changes.
distances between our
NG
communities
on init.
and many very
The
isolated
NG on
rural
init hook
communities.
initializes the directive or the component after Angular first displays the data-bound properties
We are
and sets
using
the
new
directives
technology
or
that
the
impacts the
component's
quality
input
of
properties.
prenatal care
It
and
is
the
called once
diagnostic
after the
capacity of
first
the primary
NG
care
on
doctor
changes
in the
method is
situations
invoked.
involving distant,
NG do
isolated
check.
communities.
NG do check will allow you to detect and act upon changes that Angular can't or won't detect on its own. This function is
Providing
called
medical
during
care
every
for
change
people in
detection
remote
run.
locations,
There are many more
like
lifecycle
distant
hooks that
rural
you can check out for
communities or
yourself in the
International
official
Space Station
documentation.
can be difficult.
Okay, so now moving
because
on towards
trained
the next
medical
building block,
personnel
which is
are not
metadata.
always available.
The metadata of a component informs
NASA
Angular
research
of all the
teams
building blocks
develop
required to
techniques
create
that
and
enable
present the component
astronauts
along with
aboard the
its view.
space
To be
station with
specific,
minimal
it
training
links
to
templates with
operate
the
an
component
ultrasound
either
device
directly with
using
inline
simple
code
printed
or by
data.
reference. The component along with the template
The
describes the
ultrasound
view.
images
The
are
selector that you see on
transmitted
the
in
screen
real time
is a
to a
CSS
doctor
selector
back on
that
Earth,
tells
who
Angular
can
to
make
create
medical
and insert
decisions
an
without
instance
actually
of this
being
component
aboard the
whenever
station.
it finds the corresponding tag in the
These same
template
techniques have been
HTML.
adapted for use
Template
with
URL,
portable
the
ultrasound
module
devices
relative address
in
of this
communities
component's
where expert
HTML
medical
template.
care is not always available.
Alternatively, you can provide HTML template inline as a value of the template property. Providers.
We are
This
also
providers array
incorporating the
is
first
nothing but
aid and
an array
emergency
of
care
providers for the
components,
services
improving
that the
first aid
component
at the scene of
requires.
the accident,
So
and
what
enabling
exactly
the
does
use
the
of
template do?
ultrasound to communicate
Templates
to the
are
medical
somewhat like
communication
HTML
center.
that inform Angular how to render the component. As mentioned earlier, Angular views are created in a
In the
hierarchical
ambulance,
order,
we can
and
use
the template
ultrasound
that
in
is
various
immediately
situations.
associated with the
In those
component
situations where
defines the
time really
component's
matters,
host view.
in which you have
The
little time
hierarchy
to
of
make
views will
decisions.
not just contain views from components of the same module, but also those of the other modules.
The idea of using
template
ultrasound for
syntax.
healthcare is like
As
an
mentioned
extension
earlier,
of the physical
templates are very
examination.
much like HTML, but they
You are
have
able to
Angular
conduct the
template
exam
syntax.
with much more
In
detail.
Angular, component can be
And
a
you can use
controller
it at the
or a view
time to
module,
make a
whereas the
decision,
templates
or you can use
represent views.
telemedicine
Having
platforms to
HTML in
obtain a second
templates.
opinion from
Angular
someone
templates
at a
make use
distance.
of HTML, but the script element is an exception. It does not allow this tag in order to eradicate the risk of script injection attack. If you make use
My
of
name
it,
is
the
Joaquin
tag gets
Diniz.
ignored
I'm a
and a
doctor
warning
in
will
the
be
town of
raised by the
Manga.
browser console. However, some
In
HTML
Manga,
tags like
people live with a
HTML,
particularity,
body, base,
and that is
etc. make no
isolation.
sense in Angular. Everything else,
Nós
however,
temos
can
uma
be
barreira
used.
geográfica que é o Rio
Interpolation
São
and template
Francisco.
We have a
expression.
geographical
Through
barrier
interpolation,
that is
you
the
can
São
add
Francisco
strings
River,
into the text that
which
is
is
between
both a
HTML
blessing for
element
the
tags
region,
and
but
within
it
the
also
attribute
isolates
assignments.
us.
The template expressions can be used
Nós
to calculate
vivemos numa
these strings.
região
Interpolation
em que os
syntax.
We live in a region where
Strings
financial
can be
resources
added
are
using
few.
interpolation by
People do not
specifying
have a
them
lot of
within
work,
double curly
but they are
braces.
honest, good people
However,
who do
can
not
make
have
use
much
of this in
opportunity.
different places for different
So there are
requirements.
many needy people
Angular
who need
actually
these
converts
resources and
interpolation
rely
into
only
property
on this
binding.
institution to
Another
provide
benefit
assistance.
of making use of Angular is that it allows you to configure
This
the
is a
interpolation
technology that helps
delimiter
us
and
solve
use
many
something of
problems.
your choice instead of the two curly braces. To do that, all you have to do is go to the interpolation option in the component metadata. Template expressions. Template expressions are present within two
That was the
braces
case
and
of
they
a patient
produce
who
a
came to
single
the
value.
hospital with severe
Angular will
respiratory
execute the
failure,
expression
and the people
then
realized
it
she would
assigns
die
it
in
to a
just 20
property
to
of a
30
binding
minutes.
target such as HTML elements,
We
components,
talked
or
with Dr.
directives.
Farzelli, who was training
So now
us to
moving
use
on
the
towards the next
ultrasound.
building block,
He
which
came
is
and
data
applied the
binding.
ultrasound
If you do
and
not make
discovered
use of a
large
framework,
amounts of
you'll have to
fluid
push
around her
data
lungs and
values into
heart.
HTML controls,
We
turn
performed the
user
procedure
responses
and
into
drained a lot of
actions,
fluid.
and also value
In
updates.
20 minutes,
Obviously,
10 minutes,
it is
the
very
woman
irritating
immediately
to write
experienced an
everything,
improvement,
plus
and in
it will
half
be
an
prone
hour
to
was
errors
already
and will be
walking.
horrible for someone
It
else
was like
to
a
analyze the
miracle.
code.
Arise
Using
and
Angular,
walk.
you can perform two-way
She
data
was dying
binding,
in front
which
of
is a
us
mechanism
without
that
people knowing what
coordinates
was
the
happening.
template along with the components. All you have to do is
This
add some binding
ultrasound
markup
was
to the template
instrumental
HTML
in
in order to
saving the
inform
life of the
Angular how to
patient.
connect with both these sites. There are basically 4 forms of data binding markup, and each of these has a direction. They can either be to the DOM, from the DOM, or both. Okay, so moving on, let's discuss in detail about property binding. Property binding is actually one-way binding. In property binding, value flows in one direction. That is, from the component's property into the target element's
ladies and
property.
gentlemen, boys and
It can
girls,
be used to
space
read
geeks from all
or
over
pull
the world,
data from
we
the
have
target
with us
element.
today
In
a
the
real
same
treat.
way, property
Dr.
binding cannot be
Koichi
used to call
Wakata
a method that
from the
belongs to the
Japanese
target
Space
element.
Agency,
The
and
events raised by
absolutely
elements can
one
be
of my
acknowledged
favorite
only through
astronauts.
event binding.
Actually, in fact, wait a minute.
Event binding.
I have a list right
Event
here.
binding, on the
And
other
I want
hand,
to
will
prove it.
allow you to listen to certain events such as mouse
TC's
movement,
top 10 heroes of
keystrokes,
space
clicks,
travel.
etc. In Angular,
He's on there.
event binding
Welcome,
can be
Koichi.
achieved by
Good to see you,
specifying
Tracy,
target
here.
event
Nice
name
to
within
see you,
regular
too.
brackets
Thank you for
on the
joining
left
us on
of an
Station
equal to
Live.
symbol
My pleasure.
and the template
You know, always
statement on
watching
the
your
right
program.
within quotes.
Really?
So as you can see in this example over here, I have the target event name, which is
actually
click,
honored that
and then the
that you
template
watch our
statement.
show. It's all
Whenever
about the
event
space
binding
station.
occurs, an
Yes.
event handler will
Yes,
be
this is
set by
wonderful
Angular
to
from
be
the
able to
target
explain
event.
how wonderful it
When
is
the
to
event is
work and
raised,
live on
the
board a
handler
space station.
executes
Yes.
the template
And then,
statement.
today,
This
what are
template
we talking
statement
about?
usually
Today we're
involves
talking
the
about
receiver that performs an action which is in response to the
And,
event.
you
For
know a thing or
example,
two about
storing a value of an HTML
Yes, we
control
do
into a
exercise
model.
pretty much every day.
Binding is used
I
to
was gonna
convey
ask you on
information
board,
about
did you
the
work
event.
out every single
This
day?
information can have data values
I
like
did,
event object,
because it's,
string, or a number.
not only,
so now that you guys are
to
aware
keep,
of both property
my body
binding and
healthy,
event
but
binding,
also it's a very
let me tell you guys what exactly is two-way data binding. I've already given a small introduction about this previously.
And then the best
Two-way data
part
binding
of the
allows your
exercise
application to
is,
share information between a component class and its template. In two-way
the
data
A-Read
binding,
device
there
that we
are
have
two
on
things
board.
can happen in two-way
It's
data
just
binding.
sitting
The first
right next to
is
the
setting a
cupola
specific
windows.
element property.
It's probably the best
Second is
view
referring to an
gym
element
in the
change
entire
event.
world, I think.
Angular offers
Yeah,
a
you can
special
do the
two-way data binding
muscle
syntax for
strengthening
this
exercise,
purpose.
and at the same time
Two-way
you
data
can see
binding
this
can be
beautiful,
specified within a combination of brackets,
what a
that is
wonderful plan.
square brackets
That's right, because
outside
we have the
and
cupola and we have
parentheses
that
inside.
big
So it's going
central
to look
window. We
something
call
like this.
Window 7.
You're going to
And-
see all this
and
shortly
then
when we're
most
actually
days,
creating
because
our
the space
application.
station is oriented
So now
with
let's
the
move on
belly of the
towards
space
pipes.
station facing the
With
Earth,
Angular
which means
pipes,
that the cupola
display value
windows are
transformations
facing
can
the
be
Earth.
declared
And there
in
we
your
are on the
template
A-Red.
HTML.
Above
A class
it, however
with
you
the
want, whatever your
pipe
perspective is.
decorator
But anyways,
defines
we're
a
right in
function
line
that
looking out that
transforms
window,
input values to
which
output
seems to us
values
like
for
we're on a
display
bench.
in the view.
We're doing a bench
Angular
press,
has
and we're
various
looking
types of
out that
pipes
window.
such
And
as
I
uppercase
remember
pipe,
doing my
lowercase
exercise
pipe,
one
date
day,
pipe,
and I
currency
saw
pipe, etc.
red soil
Not
go
just
by.
that,
I'm like,
you can
that's
also define
Australia!
your own pipes as well.
Exactly.
So as you can see over here, this input line is an example
Can you
of
tell us a
two-way
little
data
bit about
binding.
Sprint
Now
and
just
what that
because
was
of
all
this
about?
line that I was able to
Exercise
manipulate the
new
name of the
protocol,
course,
and,
plus see the
already
changes
several
in
astronauts
the
have
name
tried
itself.
that,
This button click over here is an
and,
example of event
basically,
binding. The course ID that you see
it
over here
uses
is
the
interpolation or
prescription
property
of,
binding.
like a
Okay, so
higher
I was actually
intensity
talking
of
about
exercise,
pipes.
but
Now you can see
less
over here that
volume
I've
or
specified
less
some
number of,
value
exercise
within the
days. For
interpolation
example,
brackets,
like
and And then I've made use of a pipe in order to convert it to uppercase letters.
I pretty much
so all the
exercised
course names will be changed
running
to
for
uppercase.
40 minutes in the
Not
same
just
pace.
this, you can also
But
chain
here,
pipes
as far as
sending the output
cardiovascular
of
is
one
concerned,
pipe function
we have
to
like
be
a sprint
transformed
running,
by another
like
pipe
for
function.
30 seconds
A pipe
sprint,
can also take
and
arguments
15
that
seconds
control
rest,
how it
another
performs
30
its
seconds of
transformation.
run. But it's
So now
only like
moving on
a
towards
6
the
or
next
7
building
minutes,
block,
very
which is
short
services.
interval,
A
but high
service is a broad
intensity
category
training.
that
And you do
encircles
that
values,
like 3
functions,
times
or
a week
features
instead
that are
of
required by
7
an
days a week.
application. Service
And so
classes have
it's
a
like a
narrow and
smaller number
well-defined
of
purpose.
days of
Components
exercise,
are
but higher
differentiated from
intensity.
services in
And
Angular
that's
so
part of the
as to
sprint
increase the
protocol.
modularity
So
and
7
reusability
years
of
ago
your
when
code. Separating the component's view-related functionality and other kinds of processing will make your component classes lean and efficient. Components are also supposed to present properties and methods for data binding in order to function as a medium between view which is rendered by the template and the application's logic, which generally includes some notion of a model. Components can delegate their tasks to services, say for example fetching some data from a server, validating user input, or logging outputs to the console. By defining such processing tasks in an injectable service class, you can make use of those tasks available to any component. Applications can also be made more adaptable by injecting different providers of the same kind of service. By making use of this class over here, I'm going to send a message to the console whenever a course detail has been fetched.
Utilize that in the future.
So what is dependency injection? Dependency injection can be used by new components to provide services or other things that they need. Components basically consume services, that is, services can be injected into a component, giving that component access to service class. You must make use of the injectable decorator to provide the metadata that allows Angular to inject it into a component as a dependency. Similarly, you can also use the injectable decorator to indicate that a component or any other class, say for example a service, a pipe, or an NG module has a dependency. The injector is the main mechanism. Angular creates an application-wide injector for you during the bootstrap process,
being here
and
with
additional
us, spending so much
injectors are
time
needed.
sharing your stories.
You actually do not have to create injectors.
Wish you all the best.
An injector creates dependencies and maintains a container of dependency instances that is reused if possible. A provider is an object that tells injector how to obtain or create a dependency. If you need any dependency in your project, you must register a provider with the application's injector so as to follow the injector to use the provider in order to create new instances. For example, the provider is typically the service class itself. In my project over here, the course list that I've shown you all earlier requires a course service. So this is basically my course service. Whenever Angular sees some component that is dependent on a service, it will first check if the injector has any existing instance of that service. If the instance does not exist, the injector will create one using the registered provider, and then it adds it to the injector before returning the service to Angular. Once all the services that are requested have been resolved and returned,
really working?
Angular can call the components constructor with those services as arguments.
And rehabilitation specialists.
So now let's move on towards directives. A directive in Angular is basically a class with the directive decorator.
Back here on Earth.
The Angular templates are dynamic. When they are rendered, the DOM will be transformed according to the instructions given by the directives. A component is technically a directive, but components are so distinctive and central to the Angular applications that Angular defines the component decorator separately. This actually extends the directive decorator with template-oriented features. In addition to components, there are two other kinds of directives. They are structural and attributes directives. Angular defines a number of directives of both these kinds. The metadata for a directive associates the decorated class with a selector element that is used to insert it into HTML. In templates, directives typically appear within the element tag as attributes, and that can either be by name or the target of an assignment or a binding. So what exactly are structural directives? Structural directives are used to alter the layout by adding, removing, or replacing elements in the DOM. For example, the ng-for directive. Let me just open my project and show you all where it's
back to where they were before they
present.
left.
This ng-for is nothing but a structural directive. This directive will allow a list of elements to my console. Attribute directives. Attribute directives will allow you to alter the appearance or behavior of existing elements. In templates, they look like regular HTML attributes, just as the name says. The ng module directive that I've shown you all earlier, which implements two-way data binding, is also an example of an attribute directive. This directive modifies the behavior of an existing element by setting the display value property and responding to change events. So I hope you guys have a clear idea of each of these building blocks.
Did you feel like you might fall?
Now it's very important for you guys to know this, because while creating your applications, you'll have to make use of each of these building blocks.
During the one-year
So now
International
let's
Space
jump on to
Station
the
mission,
most
NASA will
exciting
conduct
part,
functional
that is
studies to
creating
gain
an
insight
Angular
into key
application from
physiological
scratch.
factors that
So
contribute
like
to
I've already
changes
told
in
you all
performance.
before, make sure that
Just
your
like it would
development
take minutes,
environment
hours, or
includes
even
no
days
Node.js and an npm package manager. To check the version of Node on your systems, you can type in the command node-v. I've already shown this before, but I'm doing this just for reference. So as you can see, I have Node version 12.14.1. The first step before creating a project is to install the Angular CLI like I've already told you before. Once you're done with installing Node, you'll have to install Angular CLI on your systems. To do that, you can make use of the npm install -g @angular/CLI
Researchers
command.
hope to compile a post-flight recovery timeline and develop and validate
-g for
tests to
global,
define acceptable performance
Angular
and define the linkage between
/CLI.
physiological changes and functional capacities. This information will be helpful for astronauts and researchers as they prepare for future long-duration
Once that is done, you can create your new project.
Mars and beyond.
So to create a new
To learn
project,
more
you should
about
make
NASA's
use of the
Human Research
ng new
Program,
command,
visit www.nasa.gov.
followed by the name of the project. I'll just name it as AT, or Angular Tutorial. And this is going to take a
So
while,
now
guys.
let's hear from one of our
The first question that
studying the
prompts
cardiovascular
is,
system
if you would like
of
to
the
add
Earth
Angular
for
routing,
the Earth.
just say yes and hit enter. You'll see another question that prompts, which asks you which style sheet format would you like to use.
I'm the lead
In
research
this case, I'm
scientist
going
in
to
the
use the
Cardiovascular
CSS
Vision
style sheet.
Laboratory at Johnson
So
Space
therefore,
Center.
I'll hit enter for
So,
CSS.
the astronauts in spaceflight is somewhat analogous to if you took one of us on the ground and told us not to
So now a project
exercise
has
for a
been
long
created.
period of time.
The next step
So
is to get
spaceflight has
inside your
allowed us to
workplace.
see
To do that,
the
you just have to type in
deconditioning
CD,
effects.
followed by
see
the
all
name of the
negative
project.
things that
In
can
my case,
happen
the
when
name
you
of the
don't
project is
exercise,
AT.
when you don't do physical work
So once
every
this is
day,
done, I'll
that
have
we're
to
actually
serve this
genetically
project.
designed to do.
The Angular
So I
CLI
would say
includes
that
a server
cardiovascular
so
health
that you
is
can
important
easily
from the
build and
aspect
serve
of
your app locally.
The heart
Now,
and
to
the
run
blood
your project
vessels
using that server,
are the
you can simply
communication
type
system
in
in your body.
serve
So the experiment that
-,
they're demonstrating in the background
This
is
ng serve
the,
command will launch the server,
primary
it will watch over your
measurements in our
files, and
cardiovascular
also
experiment
rebuild
called
the app as you make changes to
and
it.
it's primarily looking at the health
-open is
and
optional,
function
and when
of
you
the
use
arteries
this,
in
it
your body.
automatically
In this
opens your
particular
browser to
case,
the local
they're
host
scanning the brachial
4200.
artery, and we use that as a surrogate for the arteries in your
So
heart,
as you can
the
see,
coronary
the
arteries.
development
So
server
we're
has
able to
automatically
see
opened.
how they would respond
The page
to
that you
stress.
see is the
And
welcome
obviously,
page.
if they respond well,
And in
then
order to build your
they're-
application,
they've got
all
good
you have to do is
cardiovascular health
modify
and has
this.
a good prognosis
So
long
now,
term
I'll get back
for
to my
the
command
health
prompt.
of the heart. So they're
And I'll
looking
just type in
specifically
code dot
at
so that I can open this in
the
Visual
vessel,
Studio Code. Okay,
expands
so
and
as you can
contracts
see,
with each
a project
heartbeat.
has been opened.
And then we also
Earlier in the
stress
session, I've
the
already told you
vessel, and
guys
see
what
how
each
well
of
it
these files
expands.
does.
And
Now what I'm
those are
going to
key
do is just
functions
open up the source
in your
file,
ability to adapt
get
to
into the
stress,
app folder.
when you're exercising.
So the source folder
or,
is the basic folder where I'm
when
going to
you're experiencing
manipulate
orthostatic
stuff
or
in order to create
gravitational
an
stress.
application.
And so it gives us a way
So I'll
that
just
we
open
can look at
app-component.html
throughout the
page,
mission
and
and
over
after the
here,
mission how the crew members are responding to the spaceflight experience. So Cardiologs is looking primarily at the health and
I'll
fitness,
select
as you
everything
might say,
except
of
the
the
last line.
arteries.
And
The
I'll
unique
delete
part
it.
of Cardiologs is we're
So
actually
now,
looking at 5 years
let me just write a
after the
simple
mission.
statement within the
So
H1 tag.
most experiments
I'll
just
say
look
welcome to Edureka.
some in and post-flight. We're actually
So now
interested
I'll
in
just save
long-term
this
health of the crew
and see if my
members.
project is
5
still
years
working.
later, were there stresses involved with spaceflight which might have caused some issues for them. Spring is another experiment that looks at cardiovascular, but it looks
Okay, so as
primarily
you can see over here, previously I had the
cardiovascular
default welcome
fitness
page of
end of
Angular,
things.
and now it's changed to what I have typed in my app-component.html file. So it looks great. So let's go ahead and build our project.
During space, and the VO2
So
max
this
test
is a very
very good
basic
because it's an
application.
integrative test.
The next thing that I'm going to do over here
Cardiovascular
is
system that
create
brings
new
together all
components
the
in order to
functions of the
display the
cardiovascular
information
system
that
so
I
you can
want my
work as
app to
hard as
show.
possible.
So to do that, I'm going to create the
these
first component of my
together give us
application.
an
I'll
idea
get
of what's
back to the
happening
command
on the
prompt.
functional side of things.
I'm terminating the development server. It's better to do so because if you keep the server running and then you create a component, you'll have to close it and rerun your program again so that Angular gets to know that a new component has been installed. If you do not do this, you will see an error saying that the component you created is not found. So what I'm going to do here is type in the command ng generate component followed by the name of the component. So that is ng generate component. And since my basic component is the courses, since I'm creating a template of the Edureka website, my basic component will have the courses of Edureka. So what I'm going to do is just name it as courses and I'll hit enter. Okay, Angular has created 4 files. The first is courses.component.html. Second is courses.component.spec.ts file. This file is basically used for testing purpose and we're not going to be manipulating this in our project
International
today.
Space Station
Next
provides
up
an
is the
unprecedented
courses.component.ts
research platform
file.
in space.
And
allowing
then you have your style sheet, which is the CSS file.
Experiments.
Now this CSS file is particular to this component, which is the courses component.
Heart healthy is vital.
So now let's get back to our project and see how these files actually look.
Here on the Earth,
here is the component that I created.
Are good nutrition and vigorous exercise. Thanks for joining
so
us
as you can
on
see,
Station Line.
here is the component that I've created,
at cardiovascular
and these are the
research
files.
being done
The
aboard
first
the
file that I'll
International
open over
Space
here
Station.
is the
And as
component.ts
always,
file.
be sure to follow us
Now,
on Facebook
before
and
starting
Twitter
off,
for the latest
Angular has
research
already
news.
written the
And
basic
download
code.
our app, which
Now,
is legit,
I want you all to
on your
note that this
mobile device.
component
Until
symbol
next
has
time,
been
we're
imported
working
from
off
the
the
Angular
Earth
core
for the
library,
Earth.
and then it is annotated to the component class. The @component decorator, like I've already told y'all before, will specify Angular's metadata for this component. So what are selectors, template URLs, and
Sometimes
style URLs?
you have to
I've
do
already
something
explained
just
to
to
y'all
show that
earlier
you can
in this
do it.
session.
When the
So
Wright
just a brief
brothers
about them,
flew for the first
selector
time, they
is
flew
nothing but
an
the component
experimental
CSS
aircraft.
element selector.
And in the same way,
Template
the Mars
URLs tell the
helicopter is
location
designed
of
to
the
show that we
component
can
template
fly
file,
powered
and style
helicopter flight
URLs
in the Martian
specify the
atmosphere.
location of the component's private CSS style sheets. This function, which is the ng-on-init function, is a lifecycle hook like I've already
From
told
day
y'all
one,
before.
this was the
And Angular
unwavering
calls
dream
this
of our
function
team
shortly
to
after
get our
creating a
helicopter
component.
launched to
It's a
Mars,
very good place to
so
put
that we
initialization
can get
logic.
the opportunity to do that very
Now the
first
reason why this
rotorcraft
class
flight
has
test
been exported is
in the
because
actual
it can
environment
be
of
imported
Mars.
anywhere else, and
It's
therefore you will
extremely
not have to
difficult
rewrite the code.
fly at Mars
Okay,
because
so
atmosphere
next,
is so thin.
what I'm going to do
compared
is
Earth's-
add a course
at
property
Mars is less
to
than
the courses
1%.
component
So
present
the
in my
first
class.
and foremost challenge is to make a vehicle that's
So I'll just
light
type in
enough
course.
to be lifted. And then the
I'll
second
name
is
this
to
course as
generate
Angular
lift.
itself.
The rotor system has just been very fast.
Next, I'll have to show this course. So what I'm going to do is just open up the courses component.html
2,000
file.
and 3,000
I'll
revolutions per
replace the
minute, and
statement
it takes a lot of energy.
with
So
an
it's
interpolation
that balance
property
of a very light
that
system,
specifies
yet
the course.
having enough energy
So let me
that's
save this.
needed to, spin
not
the
forget to
rotor
save
so
any
fast
changes
to
you make
lift,
to your project.
and on top of it, having to design in
To
the
display the
autonomy.
courses component, you must add
It
it
has
to
to
the
be fully
template
autonomous from
of
the
the
time
shell
it takes
of
off
app
to the time it
component.
lands.
Now
What
you
we
must
do on the
remember
ground is we
that
plan
add
the
courses
flights,
is the
so we
element
determine
selector
from here
for the courses
where we
component.
want the helicopter
So
to
to
go.
add an app component element to the app component template file,
experiment
all you have to do is
window
open
is 30 Martian
app.component.html,
So we have
and
planned
over here,
up
just
to
type
5
in
flights
app
of
courses.
incremental difficulty.
Okay.
The very
I hope you
first
guys are clear
flight,
to here.
the main thing is we want to get the legs
now
off
let's
the
get
ground.
back to our browser and
so
see how it
we
works.
will basically go up about
just
3
refresh
meters.
this.
And we'll hover there.
I had actually
and then
terminated the
we'll come
process.
down again.
So what I'm
And
going to
that
do
will
is
be
just
the
type in
first,
the
really
ngserve
major
command again.
milestone.
Most
In
of our
case you
flights
had
will
not
be at the 3
terminated
to
this
5 meter
process
height.
and you're trying
We
to
will be
reload
going
the page,
horizontally
and if you see
again at
any
3 meters
errors,
per second,
just terminate the
or go out
process
in
like I've
50,
already shown you all
70
earlier
meters
in
and
this
come back. In
tutorial how to
successive
terminate
flights,
a
we'll probably
process.
push that
Terminate the
further, try to
process
go
at
further.
port
So our
4200
priority will be to
and
get
then
back
rerun your
engineering
server.
telemetry and not so much images. But I'm
Okay,
sure we'll
so as you
return
can
a
see
few,
over here, I
because
have
they'll
the
always
course
look
name,
cool.
which is Angular. Previously, I just had one statement,
tested
which was
all
welcome
we
to
can
Edureka.
on Earth. We
So
have
the next thing
mathematical
that I'm going to do
models
over here
that
is
shows
create
how
a
it'll
course
fly at
class.
Mars, and we've tested it
So next,
in the
I'm going to create a
simulated
new file over
environment
here,
that we can create
and
on
I'll just
Earth.
name it as
It really is time now
course.ts.
to
In
do
this
the real
file,
flight
I'll
tests
create
at
an
Mars.
export class named
Nothing is a
course
given,
that is going to have
but
the
we have
ID
done
number
everything
and the
we
name of the
can
course.
in terms of a test
So I'll
program
just
here,
type
and
in
the
export
vehicle's performing
class,
extremely well so
followed
far.
by the
It's
name
been
of the
doing
class,
exactly
which is
the right
course.
thing even right now, and it's
It's
bolted
going to
onto
have
the
two properties,
Perseverance
that is the
rover.
ID,
So there's a very
which is
good
of
chance
number
that we'll
type,
pull it off, yes.
and
But
name,
it's still high
which is
risk,
of string type.
and none of us
let me
forget
just
that you
save
could
this.
have a glitch that,
And then return to the
could
course
mean end of mission,
component.ts
yes.
file,
It's going to be exciting.
and then I'll
reacting
have to
to
import
any
the course
surprises
class
we
that I
have.
just created.
We can't wait.
So within these import statements,
What's really most
I'll write
important
import.
is everything we're learning here
The name of the
is
class, which is
for
course,
the future rotorcraft systems that we want to introduce into space exploration.
followed by the name of the file. I've forgotten a slash over here. So now I have imported the class. So I'll just just come back to this course component class, and over here, I'll initialize the ID number and the name of the course. So let me just delete this. This course property is going to be of the type course class. So I'll just type in course equals the ID number. I'll just specify it to be 1 and the name. Okay, so let me just save this. So now I'll jump on to the component.html file, courses component.html file, and update it over here. So I'll just create a tag, I'll say h2 tag, and within this, I'll open up the interpolation braces, and I'll specify the course name. So that's course.name. Next, I want to specify the course ID as well. So what I'm going to do is just create a div class. I'll just open the div tag and span tag, and then I'll just type in ID and specify course.id. I'll just copy this line and I'll do the same for the course name. So now let me just save this and get back to my browser and see how it works. This is a very common error, guys. When you encounter any of these, just get back to your command prompt and run the ngserve command again. So I'll just terminate this and I'll rerun ngserve. Okay, I'm sorry guys, I should not specify semicolon over here. Okay, so here it is. I have the name of my project followed by the ID number, and then I had specified the name of the project again, so you see it over here. Now the reason why I specified the name of the project over here is just to show you guys how to make use of a pipe. So I'll get back to my project, and within the course component.html file, in the first place where I've specified the course name, I'll just add in a pipe, and I'll make use of the uppercase pipe. Now this is going to change all the letters present in the course name to uppercase. I'll just save this, get back to my project, and the project has reloaded. Now the name of Angular is displayed in blocks. Okay, so I hope you guys are clear to here. The word uppercase that I'm using over here is a form of interpolation binding. It's coming right after the pipe operator. So this is how you make use of pipes in Angular. Pipes are a very good way to format strings, currency amounts, dates, etc. And Angular ships with several built-in pipes, and you can create your own as well. So since I'm the admin user, I should be able to manipulate the name of the course as well. The text box should be able to display the course name property and update the property as I give the input. This means that the data will flow from the component class out to the screen and from the screen back to the class again. To automate this data flow, you can set up two-way data binding between the input tag and the course.name property. Okay, so what I'm going to do is open course.component.html file, and over here, so in place of span, I'll just use label, and then I'll make use of the input tag,
9,
and then
8,
the two-way data binding syntax, ng module, followed by the course name and the placeholder. The placeholder in this case is name. So it's
when you think of NASA, you probably think of space exploration, which is a huge part of what NASA does.
Just remove it off.
But what you might not know is that aeronautics, the science of flight, is also an important piece of NASA's directive.
To the HTML text box
it's even in our
so
name,
that data can
National
flow in
Aeronautics and
both
Space
directions.
Administration.
That is, from the course
in
name
fact,
property
NASA
to the
was
text
conducting
box,
flight research
and from
long
the text
before
box
we
back
put a
to
man
the
on the
course
moon.
name. Okay. Now when I
NASA
try
has
to run
flown
this
some
on
of
my
the world's
development
most
server,
advanced
you will
research
see that it will not
technologies,
show me any
leading
output.
to innovations in
Just refresh it
safety,
and show you guys.
speed,
So as you can see over here, it's not showing
and
any
efficiency.
output. Now this is because I have
We
to
here at
add
NASA's
ng
Armstrong
module as
Flight
it is
Research
not available
Center
by
have been on the
default.
cutting
I'm
edge
going
of
to open up
aeronautical
the
development in pursuit of our
app.module.ps
goal to advance technology
here,
and
I'm
science
going to
through
import
flight.
I'll import forms module from the Angular/forms library. The ng module is actually contained within this library. Now once this is done, I'll have to import it within the import array as well. So I'll just type in a comma over here, and then I'll import the forms module. Okay, now I'll save this. I'll get back to my browser.
Our story began in the 1940s when the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NASA's predecessor agency, teamed up with the U.S. Air Force to fly the X-1 rocket plane in pursuit of one question.
Okay, so I'll get back
Could
to
an
my project
aircraft
now.
and its pilot
The next
fly
thing that I'm going to do
faster than the
is
speed
declare
of
the course
sound?
component. Every component must be declared exactly once in ng module. So if you guys have noticed one thing, I did not import this course component class manually over here. What I've done over here is already installed an auto import package. So let me just show you guys auto import.
They successfully answered that question in 1947.
So this will automatically find,
New
import, and
X-planes
pass
soon
the
followed,
required
and
code
throughout
in
the
your project.
1950s, these
So it's better if
aircraft
you
made
guys install
headlines
this,
with
you will not
ever
have to
higher
manually
speed
import
and
anything
altitude
that is
records.
required by your application.
The fastest and most remarkable of all the rocket planes, the X-15, was flown from 1959 to 1968. There was simply nothing else like it. Pilots took it to speeds of over 4,500 miles per hour, and some flights reached altitudes so high that they passed briefly into space. Many of NASA's X-15 test pilots actually earned their astronaut wings here. One of the pilots who did not was a young man named Neil Armstrong. However, his experiences flying the X-15, as well as the Lunar Landing Research Vehicle, provided him the skills he needed on later missions, where he, of course, did end up earning his wings. Research aircraft like the X-15 provided valuable information about the human body in spaceflight and were critical in the design of future aircraft and spacecraft.
And this is going to be of a course class type. And since it's going to hold more than one values,
the Armstrong Flight Research Center introduced the world to wingless experimental aircraft.
Okay, so within this, I'll have key value pairs where the keys will be the ID and the name, and the values will be the corresponding ID numbers and the names of the courses.
We applied knowledge gained from the flights of these lifting bodies when we conducted the approach and landing tests, a milestone in the development of the space shuttle program.
And the name of the first course is going to be C++, for example. I'm supposed to specify an equal to
The prototype
symbol,
orbiter
so
Enterprise was used to verify the flying characteristics of the shuttles and to test the systems before they ever went into space. These risky flights, 5 in all, were a success, and the space shuttle program would go on to be one of NASA's most important achievements in space travel and exploration. During the life of the program, there were 59 successful shuttle landings here, including those of the Enterprise. Today, wingless lifting bodies are making a comeback as Sierra Nevada brings its Dream Chaser to flight status.
If I have to display these courses, I have to get
Supporting
back
the
to
shuttle program was only one part of our work in the post-Apollo years.
I'll have to import the courses class that I
Have you
just
ever heard the term fly-by-wire? It describes the use of electronics and computers to control an aircraft.
I type what I want to import, it's
Taking the place of
auto-imported
mechanical or hydraulic systems, fly-by-wire technology was first tested on a modified F-8 aircraft in 1972.
Okay, next
The
thing
flights
I'll
were
have to do
dangerous,
is make
but they
changes in the courses component
revolutionized aviation.
class. So what I'm going to do is
A fly-by-wire production system first appeared on the Air Force's F-16 and is now common on all new commercial airliners, most new business jets, and even in family automobiles as drive-by-wire systems.
Because it's going to make a major
ABS
impact.
brakes, cruise control,
Now, I'll open
accelerators,
the courses.html file.
even steer-by-wire
here,
are
I'm
technologies
going to make some
derived from
changes.
research done at
just remove
NASA
this.
Armstrong, and
within
all
the
are
H2
now
tag,
part of our
I'll
daily
just say
lives.
courses in Edureka. And then I'm going to specify a list. So what I'm going to do is just remove this. I'll create an unordered
Another
list.
example of aeronautical innovation
And this
NASA
is going
conducted
to
at
be of the
Armstrong
class
is
type
winglets,
courses.
which were tested and validated here in the
Next, I'll have to
1970s and
specify the list tag.
1980s. By
And then
reducing
I'll
aerodynamic
use the span
drag,
tag,
winglets
within
improve
which I'll
aircraft fuel
specify the
efficiency.
class
They are
as
now
badge.
used on all types of aircraft.
And then the interpolations symbol.
We
Within
also
this, I'm going
conducted
to
tests
specify
in the
the course
mid-70s
ID.
to find ways to reduce drag
And
on
then I'm going to
long-haul trucks
specify
with
the name of the
aerodynamic
course.
fairings, the results of which have also been widely adopted.
So once this is done, I'll just save this. Okay, so this is going to return one course. To list all the
As
courses,
far
I'll
back
have
as
to
the
make use of
1960s,
NG4.
NASA Armstrong
NG4 is
pioneered the
Angela's
use of a
repeater
ground
directive.
control
It
station
repeats
from
the
which
host
to fly
element for each
unmanned
and every
aerial
element that is
vehicles,
present
known
in
as
the list.
UAVs.
The courses list should
Becoming
be
increasingly
attractive
common
and should
today,
respond
these
virtually to
aircraft
the
are used by
user
the center to
when
develop
he hovers
technology
over
that
the
allows them
course
to
list.
see one another
To
and
do that, you
automatically
could add
take
more
evasive
styles to the
action to avoid
styles.css
collisions.
file and keep
Known
growing
as
that style
automatic
sheet in
dependent
order to
surveillance
match your
broadcast,
specifications.
or ADSB.
So you can add in
This
any
tracking
CSS that you
technology
want
is
over
something
here
that all
in order to
aircraft
display your
operating in
output
U.S.
as per your
airspace must
requirements.
adopt by January 2020 in
So
order
now,
to comply
what I want
with
to do is
FAA
enable the
regulations.
user to see the details of a course
Between
when he clicks on any of
2007
the
and
course that's present in the
2009,
list.
one of our UAVs,
Initially, I'll
known
be
as
displaying the
Econo,
details of
flew
this
over
course
thick
at the
smoke
end
and
of the page.
haze to record hotspots
So to do that,
and
I'll
the
have to
progression
add
of
a click
wildfires
event.
in
Now
California.
the click event, like I've
Data from
already
the
told you all,
aircraft
is a
sensors
type
was
of event
downlinked and
finding.
overlaid on Google Earth Maps,
So before
then
I make any more
transmitted in
changes
near
to this
real
HTML
time to
file,
the
I'll
Interagency
get back to
Fire
the
Center,
courses.component.ts
where it was made available to
file,
fire
and over
incident
here,
commanders to assist them in
I'm going to
allocating their
make the required
firefighting
changes.
resources.
So the first
The
thing that I'm
effects
going to
were
do is
dramatic
add a
enhancements for the
selected
fire crews,
course component component.
Armstrong also operates two early model Global Hawks, another type of UAV. These aircraft can fly long distances, remain airborne for up to 32 hours, and can carry large payloads of instruments into areas such as hurricanes that are too dangerous for scientists to fly in.
The return type is going to be void. And
NASA has long been involved in Earth science research, and the Armstrong Flight Research Center operates a variety of aircraft to support this directive, including two ER-2s, a DC-8, and a C-20. As well as the large UAVs. These aircraft are equipped with instruments that researchers use to obtain measurements of environmental phenomena, such as the thickness of ice sheets, precipitation, and air quality. Measurements and readings are often combined with global satellite observations and ground sampling to better understand these environmental conditions.
I'm going to specify class.
In the 1990s and early 2000s, Armstrong tested hybrid propulsion technology in the hopes of making aviation greener. Other NASA aeronautical research has improved fuel efficiency, lowered noise levels, and reduced harmful emissions. But much more can be done in these areas. That's why NASA implemented the Environmentally Responsible Aviation Project to explore and document the feasibility, benefits, and technical risks that will further reduce the impact of aviation on the environment.
In case the user selects any of the courses that's present in the list, I want to display the details of it.
Emissions,
now to
and
do that,
noise
what I have to do is include
a much more difficult challenge than working to reduce them individually.
That within the div tag.
As part of this project,
Just
NASA Armstrong performed ground tests with its DC-8, measuring emissions and fuel performance of biofuels. Results indicated as much as a 50% reduction in emissions at takeoff thrust, a difference which could significantly improve the air quality around airports. And we are currently working on an adaptive compliant trailing edge flight experiment that will demonstrate a single non-rigid wing flap that can be flexed in different ways. This leads to more efficient control methods when airborne. Flying from 2007 to 2013 at Armstrong, the X-48 subscale hybrid wing body was another program in NASA's environmentally responsible aviation portfolio. NASA, Boeing Phantom Works, Cranfield Aerospace of the UK, and the Air Force Research Laboratory partnered to study the structural, aerodynamic, and operational advantages of the hybrid model,
so now I've made all the required
called a blended wing body.
And I already have
the concept is a cross between a conventional aircraft and a flying wing. The design has the potential to yield up to 30% better fuel economy than traditional aircraft due to its unique shape.
So here it is. I have a for loop, then I have an if condition. I have a list of all the courses
that are specified Observatory for Infrared Astronomy, known as SOFIA, is a partnership between NASA and the German Aerospace Center, DLR.
Let me get back to my development
The Flying
server.
Observatory consists
of a highly modified 747 SP former airliner
carrying a 17-metric-ton German-built infrared telescope.
As and how I select the courses,
missions are flown at altitudes between 39,000 and 45,000 feet, putting the telescope above 99% of the Earth's water vapor. Being able to reposition the telescope anywhere on Earth is a unique capability. Not long ago, for example, it enabled astronomers to chase Pluto's shadow as it moved across the Earth, and SOFIA was able to study the dwarf planet for a much longer period of time than a stationary observatory. The aircraft, flown out of Armstrong's Palmdale hangar, is making infrared astronomy missions available to the international science community.
Followed by the name of the component, which is going to be course detail. A new component has been created with the 4 files, that is the HTML file,
Armstrong Flight Research Center flies modified high-performance aircraft as test beds for a variety of flight research experiments. In the 90s, we used F-18s to test and demonstrate thrust vectoring, which is a standard feature on today's F-22. We used F-15s for a series of experiments on intelligent flight control systems, a variation of which appears on the F-35. This system makes it possible to recover from what otherwise would be catastrophic failure of equipment, systems, or even portions of the aircraft itself.
Pull up. Altitude.
The course property must
Long
be an
involved in
input
aviation
property,
safety,
and it should be
NASA
annotated by
Armstrong,
an
working
input
with the U.S.
decorator.
Air Force, has been
Now,
developing
this is because the
automatic
external
collision
course
avoidance
component will have to
technologies for
bind
over
it.
20 years.
So I should add another import
The most
statement
recent
over
version
here,
of automatic
wherein I'm
collision
going to
avoidance
import the
technology,
component
or
on
ACAT,
init and the
flew
input
on an
function.
Air Force
So I'll just
F-16D.
type in import.
This integrated
I'm not
hardware
going
and
to type in
software
separately
system
over here.
is designed
All
to
I'm going to
detect
do
and avoid
is
ground
add it in
collisions.
within this statement itself. So just say comma.
Like that marker, please.
In an
So
effort
next
to
up, what
introduce
I'm
this
going to do
development
is
into
add in
general
the
aviation,
SRate input
researchers at
decorator within the
Armstrong
course
have been
detail
using a
component
small
class.
UAV,
So I'll specify
Droid, to demonstrate the ability to implement it
decorator.
using common cell
And this
phone
is for the
technology,
course,
which provides
which
for
is
low
of
cost
the
and
code
high
class type.
accessibility.
So now my details.component.ts file is ready. I'll just save
From
this.
its very inception, NASA
So now
Armstrong
I'll
has
get back to
explored supersonic flight.
courses.component.html file.
Today, the
And
goal
over
in this
here,
field is
I'll
to
have to
enable
specify the
supersonic
course detail
transportation
binding.
over land.
So what I'm going to do is just include app course detail. Within this, I'll have to specify the course property, and the target is going to be selected course. This course property specified within the square brackets is an example of property binding, like I've already told you all before. The property binding that I've specified over here is one-way data binding between the selected course property